Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 280 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on October 13th, 2024. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, on today's show, we have some news to go over, including one very, very big piece of news, which we'll spend some time on. But our main topic is going to be part 3, the final part of our discussion on the Reckoning of Roku, where we'll be going from chapter 32, Not Alone, to the end of the book. Basically, the last 100 pages of the book. But we have to get into the news here, and I'll start with the big one here, and that is that out of basically nowhere, they decided to announce that Avatar is going to be getting its first ever AAA video game. IGN got this initial exclusive reveal on this, with the core details being that the developer is going to be Saber Interactive, but it's like co-funded by Paramount Game Studios. Not really sure what the full situation is with regards to, like, is Paramount Game Studios actually doing any development, or is it just a funding thing? But that's what it says. And what this is going to be is it's an action RPG, which later did get confirmed to be open world action RPG. And it is going to be, the story is going to be about a brand new Avatar set thousands of years in the past. Again, we got an update later on from the podcast, the official podcast, that gave us extra details, which I will go over. But the initial announcement was just that it's in early development. It's the biggest video game in franchise history. It's coming to like PC and consoles. It's got a story developed in collaboration with Avatar Studios, of course. You will get to play as this never-before-seen Avatar, thousands of years in the past. You know, the usual stuff is going to have combat, exploration and stuff like that. There'll be elements new and familiar. They're hoping to expand the world building. And yeah, this co-fund structure where Paramount is helping to fund, obviously, I guess, pretty expensive AAA Avatar video game. But of course, in the initial article, no mention whatsoever of a release date. It's in early development. But what were your thoughts seeing this kind of article hit kind of out of nowhere?
I was pretty surprised. I don't think I necessarily expected them to say anything about it anytime soon. I mean, we knew that, something like this was in development. We've known that for quite a while now. But, actually hearing them say, something directly about it is, unexpected. It makes me wonder about their timing and stuff. But other than that, it's definitely cool for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then what they did, which was quite interesting, like for context, like the IGN article came out October 3rd. And then what happened was that the next podcast, we knew there was going to be gaming news on the next podcast. And that turned out, like, the people who had premium access to this got to listen to this before everyone else, multiple days beforehand. So the first reports of like more information started coming out. Then the audio version actually comes out on like Tuesday. Then the video version of the podcast comes out like Tuesday night. Because one of the things they said in the podcast was that there's this piece of Brian Konietzko concept art that they had that they were going to show everyone. But the premiere of the YouTube podcast was going to be the first time that ever happened. So it was this really odd rollout of extra information where the premium subscribers got the core information first, but then everyone was still waiting for the video version. But eventually we got the extra information on this, which is that, yes, they confirmed it's going to be an open world action RPG game. Very vague about this section, but like there is some sort of character customization type thing. They never quite confirmed that like you customize and create your own avatar, because there's a bit of a weird thing where they're really hyping up that it's a new avatar, but then there's a character customization thing. So what exactly is the situation there? But you also play as companions as well, so it might be that. They confirm it's 7,000 years ago from, I guess, Korra's era. It is an original story from Avatar Studios. Mike and Brian specifically get mentioned. Customization options. Bossing Say gets brought up by name a bunch of times. I'm not super clear on if they're directly confirming that, like, for sure, Bossing Say is going to be a place you can go around, and in what state necessarily, but they mention it. The premise for the overall game is going to be that a volcano explodes and threatens to bring the world into a kind of new ice age. And you as the new avatar have to try and stop this, or just prevent it from actually becoming an ice age. They do clarify very specifically on the podcast that it is just a natural disaster. No villain caused the volcano to explode, so that's interesting. There will be a villain, though. They confirm it's in early development, and the very, very heavy estimate on release date is, he says, 2027/2028, but they have no clue if they're actually going to be able to stick to that, how long it will actually take. It's a very early announcement of this. They say Ice Wars is the working title for the game, but it probably will change before that. And that, you will get to explore, I guess, all 4 quote-unquote nations in the game at some point. So lots of extra information. We'll go over the image in just a second, but what were your thoughts on some of the extra details that we got from the kind of podcast and the interview?
Yeah, no, when I heard those, or when I was reading about them, it sounds pretty interesting. It sounds pretty much, sort of what we've talked about before, and in line with, how they're currently doing games, and how they're producing them and stuff like that. So it sounds like they're saying, all the right things of what people want in sort of an Avatar game that's open world, that you can interact with, that you can go to the locations, which is what people always want to do. So it definitely sounds like it's, from this early on, which, it's very early on, it's on track to at least, cover a lot of those expectations that people have. It's definitely, like you said, it's very far out. It almost makes you wonder why they said it so early, but it's for hype, it's marketing, it's everything. So, there's always a reason behind it. But no, it sounds like, they have, the core idea behind it, at least.
Yeah, I think that's the only maybe slight, wouldn't even say negative to it, just maybe reason not to be just super excited right now is just that it is this thing that is coming in 4 years, maybe even 5 years from now. So theoretically, we will probably have like 3, maybe even 4 Avatar Studios animated projects by the time this game actually comes out. And so it's super weird that this game has sort of like jumped ahead of most of the earlier animated projects to get like a proper announcement where working title, here's a piece of concept art, here's a premise, whereas we don't even have a premise for the Aang movie that's out like in early 2026. We have a piece of concept art that leaked that we weren't meant to see, and then the first series, which by all accounts is also going to be 2026, we've not actually seen official statement made about any specifics about the first series. So why has the video game been announced like at this point in time versus other stuff? At the very least, I think it's good that we saw something like this, because I guess it means they're getting ready to talk, and stuff like the Braving the Elements podcast can actually have an interview where news gets revealed is good to know. And I just hope that this means that there will be a proper announcement for other Avatar Studios stuff sooner rather than later, because otherwise this does come across very odd why they chose to announce this at this specific point in time. Like, in a way, like, why didn't they wait until like the start of 2025 when they're maybe getting ready to talk about other stuff? Are we expecting an announcement kind of more imminently? What's your take on that with the timing of this? Why are they willing to pretty much properly announce this game like 5 years before it comes out, but there's still incredible secrecy about anything animated?
Yeah, that is something to consider for sure. I mean, I don't know. I think in terms of like development stuff, games do, depending on the company producing them and, everything else around whatever the property is, a lot of games do get announced, kind of early, and you do get to see some concept stuff for them, quite a bit ahead of time. think it really depends, and I think this one, Avatar has a lot of moving parts around it, and I don't know. It sounds like if they're bearing any other bigger things happening that get in the way of production and stuff like that, like they've already obviously committed like a lot of time and money already into this, so bearing something happen, ideally this will still come out. Not that that's ever given in anything in the entertainment world anymore or ever was. But that's kind of what I feel about for the game, and films and stuff are always usually a lot more hush hush. But again, it does seem odd that we're getting, like you're saying, we're getting so much information on it. So it does make it feel like maybe this is just, they're trying to start the cycle of something. But I don't know. I hope they are trying to start the cycle of something, because then that, leads to more stuff rather than it just sort of falling flat for another sort of like 6 months or something like that.
Mm. Yeah, it's just super interesting that like this gets the big IGN kind of news treatment, and probably now we're in a situation where more people know about this game than any of the animated stuff that they're working on. I know the IGN article mentions like at the very start that like Avatar Studios is making new stuff, but it's super vague the way it talks about it because there really isn't that much concrete information. But yeah, after like about a week of waiting, give or take, we did finally get to see the concept art. And actually, it's way more than I probably expected it to be. It is done by Brian Konietzko. They confirmed that on the podcast. And what it is, it's kind of basically like it's an A4 kind of style kind of piece of art. It is our new avatar who looks to be a fire avatar. Standing on a kind of rocky kind of outcropping. There's some ice behind them. They're doing firebending with one hand. Looks like potentially they've made the ice with the other hand as well. You definitely get the idea that this is kind of more old school stuff where there's still some Fire Nation clothing, kind of like armor almost that you would expect, but then it's got more kind of wrappings on the arms, and it looks like there's a little bit from all of the nations effectively on this avatar, where it's like the water tribe boots, the kind of like air nomad kind of necklace thing around the waist, maybe Earth Kingdom like arm wraps or something like that, and then a Fire Nation like top knot and other stuff. But then some of the other interesting stuff in the image is there's an animal flying kind of up alongside here, which on first glance you might be just like, oh, it's a dragon. But then you look closer and it's like, it doesn't really look like Avatar dragon. So I think most people have settled on the idea, is this like a cat dragon or something like that? Some sort of a new animal? That's probably the Avatar's animal guide. Of course, there's 3 volcanoes all erupting off in the distance in an otherwise icy landscape. And then the final really significant thing is the Avatar is basically facing from across this like ravine. A whole group of waterbenders who are all doing the kind of like octopus form style kind of thing off in the distance. So potentially telling us that the water tribes of this era, again 7,000 years ago, are the villains of this game, which would make sense. They're probably the nation or group most capable of advancing, I suppose, in a potential ice age. But interesting to see how exactly that all goes. But what are your thoughts on this really interesting piece of concept art for the game?
Yeah, no, it definitely, it piques a lot of ideas and stories and stuff, and I'm sure people have, plenty of more sort of theories and stuff about it. But, otherwise, it's just a cool, piece of art. I really do wonder how, how much of the story will play into this, sort of image that we have here, or will it, do a complete sort of like 180 on us? Maybe the waterbenders are actually trying to help the Avatar. Who knows what the creature is. I definitely get the idea that it's not sort of your standard dragon or whatever, but is that the companion? Is that something to do with the event that's happening? How big is the creature actually, like distance wise? Because can't necessarily tell that perfectly in this image, which is fine. It's a concept that's kind of supposed to be like that. So yeah, there's a lot going on with it, but it supports the idea of the volcanoes and the issues and stuff like that. So I think it works well for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just a sort of, it is a really exciting thing ultimately, because we've probably been expecting to get like a piece of concept art like this for like the Aang movie or the first series at some point, like over the last year, or for certainly going into the next year. We're expecting something like this for the other project. So getting something like this for like a completely new era of Avatar, like 7,000 years ago, is a completely blank period of the timeline. Like, you go into every piece of information we have, and we know nothing about this specific era. Like, Wan is, of course, 10,000 years ago. Um, Avatar Zalir theoretically is like over 4,000 years, but it's maybe not as far back as 7,000 years. And we only have scattered references to stuff that is about like the greater history of the world, and that this is obviously going to be pre Four Nations. So you wonder, like, okay, what is the situation here when it comes to that? Seems pretty clear it's probably pre-formation of the Fire Nation into a nation, so we're probably still dealing with Fire Islands. Has the Southern Water Tribe formed yet? Is this the event that maybe causes that to happen? Is this the event that maybe is where the North properly becomes the Northern Water Tribe? Questions like that definitely come up. Bossing Say, is it going to be a full-on walled city, or is it going to be underground with the Crystal Catacombs? And then Air Nomads, you wonder, like, have the temples or all of the temples formed yet? That's probably the big world-building thing. Like, we expect most of the landscape, I suppose, to be the same, but because volcanoes are involved, it actually opens the door to, like, the whole landmass of the world being quite different with the amount of time involved. So I don't know, what are your expectations just for the fact that we're going basically ancient Avatar, not one ancient, but it's far enough ago where it's going to be relatively different?
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I think, it's definitely a safer bet because it has, we don't have as much to associate with that time, if anything at all, other than, what we can figure out from our own history. But, who knows what bits and pieces they'll pull apart to use as inspiration for the game and whatnot. So there's a lot they can do there. I am very curious to see what is the current state of the world sort of affairs, and how, even just, the simple thing of like how the Avatar trained in this era. Like, we know that, in the time that we have for most of the written time for the Avatar is a pretty sort of like, laid out process, right? Like, we know they go from here to here, and then they learn this, and then they have their masters, and then somehow they get their own sort of companions as well. But this is a whole different era. So, we're assuming that, this Avatar has, the basis of all the four elements, but maybe they don't. Maybe they do. Maybe it's a different sort of level of, their prowess in, mastering all the different elements. So there's a lot that can go there just in terms of, how they're interacting with the world at that period of time. Like, are these the people that trained the Avatar before and now they're on the other side of things? Like, there's a lot that could go into it. And, with this sort of story and being open world, it'll be interesting to see how they weave that story and how you can sort of, shape your own destiny, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people are talking about is that kind of character customization aspect, which they were quite vague on, where like I come out of it and I'm like, okay, we play as the Avatar, but we play as companions. Are we customizing the new Avatar? Which feels a little counterintuitive if they're really hyping up the fact that it's a new Avatar, because if you go overly player created, it means you can't almost like lock in a lot of canon material. Or are they just going to allow for certain stuff, like, say, does it really matter what gender the Avatar is once the Avatar is involved in these key events? Like, the Avatar is allowed to look different, but the backstory is always that they're a fire Avatar when it comes to like the cycle and like locking them in a period of time. Because it would be weird if you could change what part of the cycle they're in, because then it makes a whole section of the timeline flexible unless you really lock down like a canon interpretation of this. I would almost prefer that the Avatar is like a set character, and then you maybe create the Avatar's main companion to be the player character. But I'm interested to see what exact way they go with this. But what are your thoughts on that? How player created do you think it is going to be, and how much of it will be kind of story driven?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think, if they did the story around sort of the world and the history and just sort of the era that they're in, then the character itself, could be almost whatever you want it to be. Like it's, the character itself, doesn't have to be the focal point of things, even though, we're kind of getting sort of mixed signals on that being the thing, because that's of course what hypes up Avatar in general. I mean, I wouldn't mind if the character, the looks of the character was completely sort of like irrelevant to things, and it's just sort of what's happening around them, like the fact that there's these volcanoes and whatever the villain is and this ice age that could possibly happen is sort of like the main thing, but everything else is just sort of around that. I think that could work in terms of that, depending on how they actually do the story and the narration, if they do that, or the voiceover, and how many different options they want to give, and what's their budget for even doing different options, if they can make it that sort of unique and open ended, because there's a huge scale and scope of what they could potentially do in terms of giving us the player options to choose from, and how many different pathways that we can go. So I think it really depends on the sort of size of the game, and they say AAA game, but that even AAA game has a range of what that could actually mean. So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, I guess if they wanted to play it safe, like you're saying, then yeah, the avatar itself could be sort of locked down, and then everything around it could be more customizable. And I think that could work just as well if we're really trying to hone into this being like an Avatar story and this is what happened. I guess it really depends how much it has to play, nicely with the timeline and everything like that, which we know from the past can be kind of iffy depending on what they're doing. But it seems like now that they have Avatar Studios, they're trying to have some sort of global sort of like oversight things in terms of how the story is actually going to run. So I don't think they'll hopefully make as many sort of missteps as that as has been noted before. But who knows? I mean, I don't know if it would be a huge issue, other than people want it to be part of everything, that if they just did something like unique, just something that's just sort of independent of its own, other than the larger sort of scope of things. But it's early days now, so who knows?
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, like, I don't think we maybe want this to become maybe like a Korra video game situation where it seems to be canon, but they never reference it. Like, I borderline think that, like, the fact that the events of the Korra video game are not mentioned in, like, the RPG material is probably, like, a pretty good sign that, like, either there's some weird licensing thing where they're not allowed to reference it directly, or it's just not considered canon anymore. So the hope here is, like, at least for me, I want it to be canon. I want this to have meaningful story. I think some of the comments that they said suggest that, original story from Mike and Brian. I assume under Avatar Studios they'll do their best to make it all work. It should be noted as also that the interview on the podcast was not just about the AAA Avatar game, it was about Avatar gaming in general. So there was talk about, like, a lot of the collaborations that we've already had for Avatar. There was a mention of this fighting game that was announced earlier in the year from Maximum Entertainment. This is where it kind of gets a bit weird, because one, it was confirmed that this game is coming out next year, but there was no title given, there was no visual for this game given, not even concept art. Just that he said stuff like, you get to pick your bender, they're aiming to have 10 characters at launch, which I think the reaction to that has been like you have all of Avatar to work with and we're starting with 10 characters? That seems very light. And I think maybe the scope of this game, we maybe need to lower expectations for a little bit. Other than saying, like, the gang is in there, but then he mentioned, like, the core 4, and everyone was just like, huh? Like, is Sokka being left out here? What are we talking about here? He basically just said that the game has, like, in-depth fighting mechanics, but will be approachable. I was a bit disappointed at there just being no details here, given that this game is actually coming out next year. But what are your thoughts on this? I know there's not much here, but any thoughts on the slight extra info on the fighting game?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like, if the game's far out, then they're willing to talk about it. But if the game's really near, then they don't want to, let anything out in fear of, what it might do to, like, ratings or reviews or anything like that, which I guess I can kind of understand, but it, did not get sort of like anything at all seems very, very weird in this estimation, at least in my sort of thought process here. But I mean, it sounds interesting, but yeah, I think, your train of thought of maybe sort of tempering your sort of expectations of what this is really going to be, um, might be the better way to go about it. I mean, I don't know. The fighting games always sounds like such a cool idea, and we've seen how this has played out before. Those granted, those games weren't sort of like solely Avatar focus,
Hmm.
but they had Avatar characters in them. They hyped up how they were going to be in there and stuff, and it can be hit or miss how they sort of implement the powers. I mean, this one, it sounds like it could potentially be good because it's, dedicated towards this aspect, but I don't know. There's not a lot to go on there.
Yeah, I think the thing here is like, yeah, we're hoping that this is maybe a little bit more than just like All Star Brawl, but aiming to be Street Fighter. I think is what they said rather than Smash Bros. But we'll see what happens here. Um, they didn't even say like, is it ATLA specific or anything like that. That's another point with this. Is like that's always a weird thing about like talking about this. Is it multi-generational, which I think is what most people want. Like if there's no Korra in here or the other characters, that's gonna feel a little bit weird. Because if you do the main team Avatar, and then you probably want like, okay, Iroh, Azula, that only leaves you like 3 or 4 slots left for like every other character. Now, admittedly, there's going to be expansion. They said there'd be more characters later, but I don't know. It just seems a bit odd. But again, we know nothing about this game right now, and that was the big contrast here. It was very vague, I would say, most of the discussion here, except when it came to like, okay, this is the news about the AAA game. Otherwise, everything else was all stuff we'd heard about. They talked about Realms Collide, but they said nothing that we don't already know. Um, it really feels like, okay, yeah, that game is just, it's going to hit whenever it hits. They don't have a clue when they're going to launch it, but they seem certain it's going to be this year. They just have no clue when it's actually going to be, which is odd. And then towards the end, he talked about how like there's lots of other games that they're kind of planning to do, like puzzle game, all these other kind of things. They want to do something with VR, so they're all in on Avatar. That there'll be lots of different stuff, but Ice Wars here is going to be the big game that we're all waiting for in a bunch of years' time. From there, we'll move into our other kind of piece of news. We talked about this on the last podcast, which was the announcement of the New York Comic Con panel, the Avatar Legacy panel. When we talked about it, there was 4 guests announced: Cara O'Neill, Ethan LeBlanc, James Mendez Hodez, and Randy Rabai. Now, 2 more people have been added to the panel. So we now have Joan Hilty, who of course is an executive editor at Avatar Studios, heavily involved in like the comics and stuff like that. And then also, probably more interesting to talk about, Rachel Silverstein is added to the panel as well. Her involvement with Avatar is that she wrote from Patterns in Time the short story Skyscraper, which is a 4-page comic about young Asami and her mother Yasuko. So it's like the first time we got to really see Yasuko. But it's been quite a while since that book, so why is Rachel Silverstein on the panel? Is the question I think a lot of people have had since this came out. And it feels like, okay, I guess there's going to be a comic announced where she's going to be the writer. That would seem to be the obvious thing. Otherwise, it's just, hey, who here has worked on Avatar? You, come on the panel. That seems a bit weird, given that it's only a 4-page comic. I know she's been on a panel previously, but that was more in or around the release of Patterns in Time, where it made a bit more sense. Doesn't make as much sense in 2024. So what are your thoughts here? How does Joan Hilty and Rachel Silverstein being added to the panel affect, I suppose, your view on potential news from this panel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it, hypes it a little bit more up because there's more people involved with it. And I think, more people on a panel involved with a certain property is always a cool thing to have different opinions and stuff like that and see where they're going. But in terms of, news and stuff coming out, I don't know if that necessarily makes it any more. I mean, the idea of, a new writer, and someone being part of Avatar Studios directly, no, it definitely does lead you to think that there's potential for more coming out. But it does seem like this would be more on the books and the publishing side of things, which is what we've come to expect from this, and that's what they're joining. That's the main purpose of this anyway. So I don't know. I guess that would be what I would be looking for from this, and not much else. Which it's good if they're doing it, since they've kind of been a bit slow with things. So maybe this is the beginning of a ramp up of things in terms of this, which is what they've said before.
Yeah, this is where we get into some interesting stuff in terms of like, we're obviously expecting the next Avatar comic to be announced, and it would be weird if it's not. I'm pretty sure we know it's going to be the same creative team, but they've been so unspecific. I'm not even sure, but it will be the sixth to the second trilogy kind of coming to an end. So I'm assuming Peter Wortman and Faith Theron Hicks will be on the next Avatar comic. I think it's a little less specific with the next Korra one-shots. I'm pretty sure Alexandria Monique is confirmed to be the artist on all three, but that could have changed with all the delays. I don't really know. Kiku Hughes is the writer for the Mako comic, but again, I don't know if they actually confirmed that she's going to be writing all three of the currently kind of confirmed Korra one-shot. So maybe Rachel Silverstein is brought on board to be the like one-shot Korra one-shot number 2 writer. That's a potential option. The other stuff is sort of like Webtoons is here, and pretty much the only reason people are excited for Webtoons is if they announce original content, which would need a writer and an artist for original Avatar comics. Maybe that's what that is. Otherwise, it's very difficult to know what exactly is going on here. Might it be another short story collection, and maybe she's doing another short story? It's hard to say. It's very, very difficult to speculate. But I believe at the last panel that she was on, Rachel Silverstein talked about how I think she pitched a much bigger, grander Asami Yasuko's story. As in, like, I think she wanted to tell what happened to Yasuko's story. But they obviously said, it's a short story collection. You only have 4 pages. That's not going to happen. So maybe there's a suggestion that maybe I think a lot of us are expecting Asami to be one of the one-shot characters, and so maybe she could do that. Hard to say. I always hate having to temper expectations going into these panels, but it does feel like this is sort of the last, I'd say, like, publishing only kind of panel that we're really going to have, where we would expect Avatar Studios to play a role in Comic-Con panels after this. Kind of feels like the publishing should do a little bit more here, partly because they need to. Like, I think just one book being announced coming out of this would be a little weak, given that there's not much on the horizon, when it comes to, like, Beasts of the Four Nations we're still waiting for. We need a new Avatar and a new Korra one-shot. I'm not sure. But they definitely need to announce some stuff. And I hope stuff like the video game announcement that they just did kind of opens the door to, are you now ready to talk about publishing ramping up? Are you now setting the stage for next year is going to be a really good build-up year for Avatar? I'm not sure how confident I am, because a lot of the times these panels can be disappointing, but it kind of feels like they have the right lineup to do something here. But I suppose, where are you at when it comes to just, like, at this point, last speculation before the panel next week, how many announcements are you expecting?
That's a good one. I think I would expect at least one. I think max might be maybe 2 to 3, depending on what they're going for in terms of, like, real book/comic stuff, not including like board games or other stuff like that, which they might do some other things with as well. I think that's what I would go and would hope for. But I think if we get one, I think that would be kind of good, unfortunately, considering what we've been going through so far. They did a lot more than that, then I don't know, that would seem very extra, that they would be able to do something like that at this point in time. Because I think if we're considering this sort of one of the last of the publishing ones, which I'm not sure, depending on how next year goes with them and the production of stuff, how I would consider this necessarily the last one. But it definitely would be cool if like the next one was like an Avatar Studios panel, even if it was still primarily sort of semi-focused on publishing. Just the fact that it has that sort of air around it from the real studio, I think would help a
Yeah.
lot. And then I would think they would do at least one concept thing of maybe the show officially. Um, but yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see.
Mm. Yeah, I think I mean it more just in the sense that like when it feels like Avatar Studios is like whispered in silence like during these panels. Like they're very afraid to really mention it out loud. Like that's in the future. Like right now we're just small publishers doing small Avatar books type thing. We're not a big franchise just yet. But by the time we get to SDCC next year, July 2025, I think we're expecting like we'll have some visual or some much more concrete news about the first movie. Avatar Studios will be like a thing. We'll be building up to a merchandise line, as far as we're aware, at some point in probably the second half of next year. It just gets to a point where, like, okay, there probably will still be an Avatar Legacy panel next year, but there should also be another like main panel as well. Whether they kind of morph the Brave and the Elements podcast panel into like the Avatar Studios panel presented by Brave and the Elements or whatever, that there's those two things, but that the publishing is then enhanced because Avatar Studios is now public and they can talk about their bigger plans, and that like the novels, like it's not just the one series, it's maybe a second series. The comics are now open to maybe do trilogies again or whatever. These bigger announcements could theoretically happen depending on how big publishing they really want it to be. But we'll see what happens here. So I'm going into this more with just like, I hope this is the last of the big conventions where we have to be reluctantly happy with like one book announced, the bare minimum. Whereas I think we should be like excited, actually having expectations for these panels after this. But yeah, we have to wait and see how it all happens. As we pointed out, I think on the last one, timing isn't maybe the best for people going, as well as probably people trying to like catch the information, because it's like 6:45 p.m. to 7:45 p.m. Pretty much end of the day at the convention, but maybe there'll be some announcements. We'll have to wait and see. Final piece of news, just really quickly: Avatar: Journey of Aang, the GameFound crowdfunding board game, finally announced the launch date of the campaign. So it's going to be October 22nd when this actually launches. So it's not next week, it's the week afterwards. So that's pretty exciting. It's been a while kind of building up to this. They told me like it was going to be like basically the month before, September 19th, I think is what they told me. I guess some stuff happened behind the scenes to delay it. But they're finally going to launch. And this sort of stuff is always interesting to follow, just to see how much does this make in relation to other board games. And the last Avatar kind of Kickstarter, the Avatar Legends one, did very well. How will this do in comparison, given that like it doesn't really have new information, it's not like a book, it's just a game. I'm excited to follow this and see how it goes, and if they have anything kind of special going on with the campaign in terms of like if you back it, you get like a poster or like that sort of stuff. But I don't know, any interest or expectations for you when it comes to the actual campaign for the board game here?
Not overall. I think, like you, it is interesting to follow just from the aspect of seeing how much sort of interest and hype and buzz it generates, which like we've seen from these projects, sometimes they can do pretty well just on the name of Avatar in general and the history that it has. So I suspect it'll still do pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but from there, we'll go into our main topic here, which is our final review discussion for The Reckoning of Roku. So this is going to be part 3 of 3, and we'll be starting on chapter 32, Not Alone, all the way to the final chapter, which I think is chapter 55, which is Epilogue, so the last 100 pages of the book. We left off at a point where we're just about to go into a really big chapter, which is going to be the reunion of Roku and Gyatso, as well as Roku meeting Malaya for the first time. So it's pretty nicely set up for we're going into the setup ahead of the kind of finale sequence, which is going to be all around the sacred cave, of course, as well as trying to free the earthbenders and stuff like that. So let's get into this here. Chapter 32 is one of the more significant chapters in I would say, the whole book. It's one of the longer ones as well. So what happens here is Malaya gets to meet Roku for the first time as Roku and Gyatso return. And once again, she is able to kind of see through the lies that are in Ulo's stories because, hey, the Avatar is not just this glorified executioner, though interestingly, as we learn later on, that is a somewhat truthful way to maybe refer to late-stage Kyoshi, which is kind of interesting. It's not completely made up, but probably still embellished by Ulo. Everyone exchanges information about what they've learned kind of away from each other in regards to Roku talking about the power in the cave, and that being why pretty much everyone is here. And also they highlight that the clan and Ulo is very likely to kill you, Roku, at some point, just so you know. And once again, we bring up the idea of Gyatso pointing out that maybe Sozin also was here for the power. Can you finally accept this, Roku? And tensions begin to rise. But Malaya steps in and is like, hey, Gyatso, tell him about Yama. Because she can see that the fact that Roku doesn't know this story is part of where a lot of the confusion is happening about this. And we'll cover this backstory and then we'll have a discussion here. So what happened with Yama? We find out Yama is 2 years older than Gyatso. She was on a relief mission in the Southwest Earth Kingdom, where they went to this mining town basically run by the Western Kingdom Trading Company. And they had been running this mine into the ground, literally and figuratively. Terrible conditions. The land has been kind of poisoned. Everyone is dying basically in this village. The whole reason the airbenders are here is to pretty much give them kind of like end of life care here. And as this is happening, a giant sinkhole opens up because it was overmined, and everyone gets swallowed up. So Yama, some of the other air nomads died, as well as everyone in the village. Like an entire village was lost because of the greed and lack of care of the Western Kingdom Trading Company. This is why Gyatso is so angry at that situation at the company, and why he's so angry at Sozin, because he sees Roku defending Sozin as Roku defending someone who would do something like the Western Kingdom Trading Company would do, which is Sozin is likely someone who won't care about the little people overall. But what are your thoughts on this important kind of first half of this chapter?
Yeah, no, this was really, finally getting the story of Yama was, I think, a very key point to sort of understanding Gyatso as a character, so that I like that we finally got at this point, the later half of the later stages of the book here, and, we sort of get the fuller picture of things as Roku does at the same time. And this really, it's really a turning point for them, as we see coming up here, because it really, breaks down sort of the issues that Gyatso's been having. And, he later explains how this actually, was finally able for him to sort of let go some things. But I think it was very key, especially considering Roku's past and everything, to understand this point in this story. And I think, it's nice that, the three of them here as this sort of, new trio are, talking about this and sort of getting things out in the open, and that, you can see sort of the camaraderie that they sort of, are starting to have here. And, you can already see it between, Gyatso and Malaya, as they mentioned, as soon as they sort of meet up, for the first time here. So I thought this was a really good sort of, way to sort of show this new group forming together.
Mm-hmm. And so once Roku now understands, he does reluctantly admit that, yeah, I can see Sozin being interested in getting this power for himself. Because he knows Sozin's all about the legends, and him acting on those legends is absolutely something Sozin would do. So he admits the truth. The two are then able to kind of fully kind of reunite, make up. There's a pretty notable hug here, which is quite notable because for Malaya, seeing this, like, she has a pretty big reaction to this, that it's this very kind of intimate hug between these two friends, and she's kind of never really seen something like this before, and she feels almost like embarrassed, like watching this, kind of being there as it happens, as the two of them apologize for the kind of insults they hurled at each other in the big argument chapter from a while back. They then get to setting what the plan is going to be, which ends up resulting in Roku's going to go back to Ulo because he needs to get information. He's on the inside. They kind of need to use that. He's going to stay alert, though, because he kind of knows Ulo is now going to kill him. Something to do with the Equinox ritual. And what Gyatso and Malaya are going to do is investigate this grove on the other side of the valley where Roku kind of tipped them off to something's going on where they don't want to talk about it. Likely this is where the missing earthbenders are. And then as a really nice thing at the very end of the chapter, the boys then ask Malaya of like, hey, Malaya, are you okay with this plan? Do you think this is a good plan? And she's kind of like, wait, what? Why are you asking me as if I'm part of the team? Like, I have a say in this? And they're just like, yeah, sure. You're part of the team. You are a Team Avatar member straight away. And we just get the idea. It's from her perspective, like for the first time ever, she kind of truly feels like she belongs and they're not alone because they've all come together here in this kind of big moment. So we're starting to see this other side to Malaya where we got teases of it before. Not used to these kind of really emotional relationships, and so her gaining proper friends for the first time and seeing how true friends act, and she's now part of a group like this is very meaningful for her. And it's like you're seeing more of the separation of her from the clan, and that she probably would do better off the island sort of thing. But what are your thoughts on the stuff towards the end of this chapter?
Yeah, no, that is interesting, though. She is, where the island itself being so isolated, a lot of the people are, sort of a strong community because of that, but, she's even separate from that. So it's, interesting to see from her eyes how, these two friends who, not that they've been friends, that close for that long, but you can see sort of the connection that they have and how she's basically learning from them sort of like how to be a friend and how to interact with people. She's, we've mentioned before in earlier chapters how she's, she thought that she sort of like messed up things, but then she sort of is able to bounce back from it. And, we get to see some of that happen even later on as, we'll continue this story. So I think it's cool to see that here. But yeah, it's a nice way of sort of setting the group up, them sort of conversing here, sort of getting the information out there, them sort of listening to Malaya, even though, Roku was a bit sort of, skeptical of things because, he's been, basically in Ulo's care this whole time. So he could have been, sort of off at almost any time. But, she tells them the story of the ghost spider, and there's, that whole sort of aspect that, they sort of, consider as well. So I like that they're sort of working together as a team at this point, and it shows some success that they could potentially have in the future.
And I think I skipped over it in my summary there a little bit, but they do quickly address the idea of Gyatso's like, hey, if you have to confront like Ulo, don't kill him. And Roku's like, yeah, okay, I promise. But Malaya and Roku both sort of realize that, yeah, kind of, you might have to, it might be the only way. And they seem like okay with it, but Gyatso is of course very against it, which will come up as a kind of plot point towards the end of these chapters, as we'll get to. Next chapter is chapter 33, Fires Meant to Forge. It's a pretty quick Sozin chapter, where we actually sort of get reflection of Sozin on the death of Yasu, and that part of why he's so eager to save Roku at all costs is because of how much the loss of Yasu affected him, so he won't lose his remaining brother. That's why he's rushing back as soon as possible. They basically arrive at the island here. He has some reflections on stuff like he doesn't really care about being punished by his father because he knows his birthright won't be like revoked because his sister, the only other member of the family, really is a girl and a non-bender, so there's no chance that, like, no matter what he does, basically he's going to receive more than, standard punishments, maybe a small banishment they kind of allude to here, but he's okay with that because this is what he needs to do. While this is happening, they kind of do like knife throwing, and they just address Sozin is super intense about this because he like gets the knife glowing before he throws his one. But quicker chapter, but what are your thoughts on Sozin just about to arrive on the island?
Yeah, I think it's, these little chapters with Sozin and stuff like that, they almost are sort of like trying to give us hope, even though, of course we know the end story, we know the end game. But they're there to sort of give us sort of the idea that sort of, Sozin, maybe he isn't quite sort of like as bad as we think he is. Like, he is caring for his friend in this moment. That is, that seems to be his main priority, right? Like, this is what he's, he left, the library that he's been searching his whole life for to sort of go help his friends. So, I like that we have this idea that, he has, right now, even though his pure priorities are still kind of skewed, he's still, going towards sort of the nicer side of things for now. But it's just sort of like, how long does this sort of last in this moment? But that's just sort of where he's at in his sort of character arc. But I do like the little, callback to sort of, banishment and how that could sort of work, and it being temporary. But it's, that's an interesting position for him to be in, where he's, pretty secure in his birthright. Like, there's, unless his father has another kid and, goes through that whole process again, he's technically pretty safe in this moment, but who knows what could happen.
Yeah, and the title is pretty nice because it's alluding to what we basically saw happen right at the end of Shadow of Kyoshi, which is that like Zoryu like effectively like introduces this idea of the Fire Nation royal family like forging the next in line to be better, kind of more to the point and stuff like that, and we see this like Zaison being pitted against Sozin is a big thing, of course, but he doesn't really feel the competition because he's the firebender, she's not. All this sort of stuff. It's very, very interesting. Next one is chapter 34, The Plan, which is literally the plan. It's another pretty quick chapter. They arrive at the secret grove and they do find that, yes, the earthbenders are being kept in these cages held high up in the trees, guarded by a lot of the other members of the clan. The plan is that Malaya will shoot down the cages with her bow and arrow, and Gyatso will use airbending to cushion the fall with airbending. So Malaya is putting a lot of faith in Gyatso being able to act very, very quickly. And kind of like Roku Gyatso from earlier on in the book, she just immediately kind of like starts before Gyatso is kind of quite ready necessarily. But they also know that the second they free everyone, it's going to be like chaos. It's going to be a free-for-all. They have to be ready for a fight in some way, because there's like three groups involved here. Crazy stuff is going to happen. But any thoughts on this quick The Plan chapter?
Yeah, it really is a really quick one. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just another quick way of showing sort of the interactions between Gyatso and Malaya, which I think, even if they are, such a small bit of the story, it really does sort of, I guess you could say, like add up over time, which I think is, kind of the point of it here. But yeah, it definitely feels like, which I guess, airbenders are good at thinking on the fly, right? Like that's sort of like their whole thing. So anyone who's, sort of working with the airbender is just like, yeah, sure, they'll be able to do this thing, even though, I think he makes note that he can't necessarily see what Malaya sees here, which they're constantly sort of saying, which is interesting, just sort of how they're even though we know the power of the island is sort of regulated to the cave, at least from the scouts perspective, they seem to be very sort of just generally enhanced compared to at least the normal benders, which we already consider pretty enhanced just by the fact that they're benders.
Next we go to chapter 35, Fulcrum. So Roku, back with Ulo, now refuses to drink the tea, realizing that, I guess this is what's been affecting my energy. And this is a bit of a deeper cut about the tea that we got the explanation on in like one of the very early Malaya chapters, that it is meant to kind of limit energy and kind of like keep people subdued. So he stops drinking it and immediately feels better. And he talks with Ulo about kind of what the plan is for where they go in to do the equinox ritual. Ulo wants, we're going to sit down, we're going to meditate, eyes closed, we're not going to move, don't use any bending or it's all going to go wrong. And Roku's just like, very convenient for someone who wants to kill me that they want me like completely still with my eyes closed. And they just address that if they don't complete the ritual, there will be no power in the cave until they try again at the next equinox. And we start to get into this whole idea of, wait, how much of what Ulo says is true about this whole situation? How much of it is wrong? Because a lot of it ends up not being true, but then they never really explain the full situation. It starts to get a bit confusing. Not quite here, but we're beginning to get into it because they don't actually properly explain what the ritual is. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, this is something to sort of get the idea of this sort of ritual that they have to do and how the Avatar is going to be involved with it, which, I think if there wasn't, all of these extra overtones on top of it, like, this could seem, kind of standard sort of thing to do. Like, you were just, meditating and sort of communing with the spirits. Is, we've seen that a bunch of times already. So it's not like it's a brand new thing, but, because of the situation, there's all these other things around it that make it sort of like suspect, which is unfortunate because, otherwise it sounds like it would be like a great sort of way of, communicating and understanding and connecting with the world and the land that they're on. But, there's unfortunate sort of side to all of this, which is sort of tainting it.
Mm-hmm. Next chapter is chapter 36, The Teeth of the Trap. So they do the plan. Malaya hits all her shots. Gyatso saves everyone from being badly injured in the fall. All the Earthbenders are freed, and immediately, obviously, chaos breaks out. The Earthbenders, of course, make their escape, and like a lot of stuff happens. They're left to sort of fight against the kind of island warriors. And what basically happens here is Amihan arrives on the scene, and so we get Amihan versus Malaya kind of in the trees, while Gyatso pretty much faces everyone else on the ground on his own. Most of the chapter is Malaya versus Amihan, and we just cut back to Gyatso at the end, in a pretty fun thing right at the end. Basically, Malaya, obviously it's a non-bender versus a very skilled airbender here in the trees. Malaya gets some assistance on the ground from Gyatso, helping her jump between trees and stuff like that. But it's a pretty violent fight here of like, Amihan trying to use her slicing airbending. She also has like knives and stuff like that. Malaya has her knives, so it's very up close kind of focused. That's the only way Malaya has a chance, is to keep it up close. And eventually she kind of engineers that situation and forces Amihan back until Amihan slips, basically knocks herself out on the tree branch, and is only saved by her own gorilla Tarsier. So that's Amihan out of action here. And then Malaya gets back down to the ground and finds out that Gyatso has single-handedly, with ease, captured and defeated all of the other warriors by himself. And he just finally gets to note that, like, oh yeah, when I said I was a really good airbender, like, I'm really, really good. And so we get to see the full skill of Gyatso through just the ease at which he handled this situation. What are your thoughts on this action chapter of the plan going off?
Yeah, I mean, action-wise, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I like, the whole battle between Malaya and Amihan. I think, was very well done. I think you definitely get sort of the idea of how they're sort of fighting, in the trees and using their abilities, using their knowledge of the environment, them being, native to this island, and how that, sort of, so much gives them the edge in the situation. It's definitely something of note, especially with, a bender versus a non-bender. Sometimes that can be kind of sort of like overwhelming in terms of, one-sided in terms of the battle here. But, Malaya is, she's been involved with, different things. Like, that's been her whole thing, is that she's very sort of, a learned character. So she knows, sort of the advantages that Amihan has. And I don't know if we know where she got a lot of her airbending. I can't remember that part, but, she has that sort of knowledge in general. So she's able to sort of think on the fly here. Even when she does, sort of loses her weapons and stuff like that, she's able to sort of make the best of the moment here. So no, I thought the fight was pretty good here. It is a bit of a shame that we don't get to see, or hear, exactly what Gyatso's sort of doing. But I guess, the idea is just that he's just that good. So, of course he would sort of win in this situation, which I think, also being an airbender in general just gives you like a large advantage, unless the other person is like a very sort of skilled bender in their own right. So I guess that kind of makes sense that he would be able to do, like we've seen him do before. Like once his bending is on and is working correctly, he's pretty good at it. Which sort of goes with everything that we've sort of heard so far. So no, it was a good sort of action scene.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that like they don't quite go into it from like a style point of view because they don't do like Amihan versus Gyatso, but like the fact that Amihan sort of like I suppose slips kind of feels like a non kind of typical airbending style type thing that uh, usually you associate like airbenders as having like incredible balance that they just just pivot or something like that and like keep their balance somehow. Like Aang has like the crazy kind of balance even when he's nearly falling over. So just maybe a slight difference in style here. The more lethal, aggressive style of Amihan versus classical airbending. Maybe sort of similar to like Zahir versus Tenzin that we saw, which is kind of interesting. Because yeah, that is the last we see of Amihan, I think, in the whole book. So she's still alive, but she gets away somehow, and we might see her in maybe book 2. But next chapter is chapter 37, Favored by the Spirits. So we're back with Roku and Ulo. So we get to see Roku kind of reflecting on, again, the tribe, and he notes that, what they have here is very, very impressive. And again, like Ulo is a good leader, but the approach of killing all outsiders, he can understand it to a certain point of view, but even Ulo notes more and more people are coming to the island. They're killing more and more people. That means eventually this is going to bring destruction to the island. It might not be super soon, but they're going to kill the wrong person and some sort of an army is going to come and sort of their stories, I guess, will come true. There's no way that this is just going to last forever. And so Roku realizes that, yeah, this approach of just killing anyone just for arriving here, trespassing to a certain degree, not right. Ulo then gets very honest, it seems like, with Roku and says, oh yeah, sorry, sacrifices are not actually required for the ritual. The spirit does come, but no chief has ever spoken to young Gib, and their offerings have basically always been meaningless, so they don't do those anymore. They just keep up the act to reassure people because that's what they've always known. Roku highlights that, oh, you control them, and Ulo, of course, rephrases it not to come across that badly. Roku then asks, I think, the really valid question. In that case, why do you even need to go to the cave during the equinox for some sort of a ritual? And this is probably one of the more confusing parts of the book. He says, the ritual is necessary for siphoning the spiritual energy into the cave. And I don't think that ever gets really touched on again. And I'm assuming it's just Ulo lying so that, like, okay, no sacrifices, but I still need you to come because we need to do this energy siphoning thing. He then reveals that what he wants to do is to transfer the energy into Roku because he feels that the Avatar is the only vessel basically strong enough to carry enough energy to take it out of the cavern. And he basically points out that it's like you'd be in the Avatar state at all times, and I just want you to protect the island basically in exchange for helping you accomplish this. Roku kind of considers this, of course. He's like, no, that's way too easy. I don't want to just be in the Avatar state at all times. That sounds terrifying. And he quickly figures out that likely he just wants to do the same thing, but the power going into himself instead of Roku. So some details coming out here quite interesting, but again, very hard to distinguish between the lies and the truth of the actual situation here with Ulo. But I think a pretty interesting chapter in what they kind of discuss here. There's a lot of, as we do the slow build up to the fight between these two, a lot of Roku thinking through everything of like, Ulo's not completely bad, he's done some good stuff as a leader, but this other stuff is very bad. What is the right thing to do as the Avatar going forward? It's very interesting from his perspective. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, no, we definitely are getting the more sort of thoughtful Roku sort of considering his options, as we see, progressively throughout the book, he's becoming more and more sort of like learned and understanding of, what it means to be the Avatar here. And, he can see, the good points that Ulo does have in terms of, protecting his people, sort of understanding their worries, like going through the process, keeping some of these traditions alive. He actually, he seems to really sort of care about his people, which is, what you would hopefully want in sort of like a good leader here. It's just sort of, how far is he willing to go and how far is too far, in order to protect the people, that you're supposed to sort of keep in check here. So it's definitely something to consider. And, Roku's seeing all these different sort of angles here. And I like that, Roku's, he's gotten to the point here where he knows that like he can't take the easy way out in these situations. Like even if it's a hard thing or a hard choice, this is what he's going to sort of have to do. So him not wanting to be, sort of in the Avatar spirit sort of like all the time, which we know that he's read the past texts of the other avatars, so he probably has like probably a better understanding than most sort of up and coming avatars, sort of what that really entails without actually having been into that sort of state, which he has had the Sacred Caves powers before, so he has I guess sort of an idea of what sort of like overwhelming power might actually be and might having it. So I think he's been sort of scared straight in that regard in terms of wanting the power just for the power's sake, which I think is good because I guess you consider a lot of I guess what we're considering fire avatars are sort of more about that considering anything else. So no, I like that he's considering things and that he's seeing things for what might be the real truth of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Next, chapter 38, The Machine. So Malaya and Gyatso follow the freed earthbenders and they find the village has been destroyed. So in revenge for being captured and other people being killed and injured, the earthbender soldiers have gone back and destroyed the natives' kind of home here. We find Yuming and Chija are here and they talk to Malaya and say that they were unable to stop the soldiers. They only wanted revenge and there was nothing they could do to stand up against all of the soldiers. Malaya now wants revenge for this because she's helped these people and now they've destroyed her home basically. And Gyatso has to try and get her back on track by focusing on helping the injured people, those who have survived the attack, rather than seeking out the earthbenders for revenge. So this starts this kind of arc with Malaya towards the end of the book here where she's been quite idealistic up to this point, but now suddenly she's personally affected by the outsiders kind of doing what Ulo said they would do. And can she stick to her guns and like how she feels about this, or in a way will she become the way that others want her to become? And she's kind of put in an interesting position here where she does feel the anger and rage, but is she going to go down that kind of almost expected path for her is the idea. But this chapter has a bit of a twist to a certain degree. Suddenly, Sozin, Dalasai, and Kozuru appear before Malaya and Gyatso, asking where Roku is. So this is where we have more characters meeting up with each is quite interesting. So what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, this is, definitely sort of a tipping point for Malaya's character here. Because, yeah, like you said, she's been sort of, talked down and her own sort of morals have guided her away from sort of, what, they sort of are taught or, what eventually the scouts become in terms of, protecting the village here. And here she's, pretty quickly, ready to do a 180. Granted, this in the service, or not necessarily in a service, but in sort of the reaction of the service of her village here. So, she's not so isolated from her village that she doesn't care about the people there. I think we definitely get to note that the people that she's interacted with directly, she has a lot of care for them and what they've sort of taught her, probably more so than her own sort of like family itself. So you can sort of get the idea of her wanting the sort of revenge here, but Gyatso's, he's definitely on the other side of things, the other sort of conscience on her shoulder, telling her to sort of wait it out and help help the people that are still around, which I think in this sort of instance seems like the better choice to do, since there are people still there that do sort of need help, and she's really gets involved with that in this sort of situation here. And you can make note of how Gyatso's like automatically in command of the situation, like he was sort of, designed to do this and stuff like that, which is what, we've come to gather that the airbenders are sort of all about here. So it's nice to get to see, Gyatso in this sort of situation as well, and sort of, how he's able to sort of help in this situation, which seems to be really, really worth it.
Yeah, like that's where we start the book, with airbenders on a relief rescue mission. Obviously, one of these is also where Yama died as well. This is what the airbenders do, so nice to get that. But yeah, next chapter, chapter 39, Exhale. Probably one of the kind of shortest and maybe least important chapters in the book, where it's very much just Roku and Ulo walk through the cave. They go into the center of the cave. They sit down, lotus position, and they wait. It's more of just a building tension chapter. There's not as much even like Roku kind of thought process here. Just like, okay, it's happening. We're here. It's like just over one page basically here, and it's just the idea again. He's thinking about things a little bit in this one, but it's mostly just positioning kind of going on here. As yeah, the chapter title is Exhale, because he starts to breathe to kind of calm himself down before the action happens. So, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it is really, really short. But yeah, I don't know, it feels like it's just sort of Roku just preparing himself that he needs to talk first and do, to act first. But, he's definitely going to be, he's going to wait and listen for the right moment to happen here.
Mm-hmm. Next one, chapter 40, That Oh So Smooth Melon. So immediately, Gyatso hates Sozin. He just really doesn't like him. It's the same in reverse as well, for reasons we'll find out later on. Those two don't like each other. Malaya is very cautious about Sozin as well, because she definitely just gets the sense that this is like Ulo 2.0 kind of here, the same type of person. And he just is immediately like demanding, take me to Roku, I don't care what else is going on, I need to be taken to Roku. They reluctantly agree to take him, because if they disagree with him, they fear he might, start attacking people or do something like that. They sense he's dangerous. And we just get from Malaya's point of view that she really feels that she has to do something to get Sozin away from her clan, because she just immediately gets the sense that it will be a disaster for him to kind of stick around too long. So yeah, guiding him to his mission, which will hopefully lead to him getting off the island sooner, is, I guess, the best action to do right now. This is definitely that section of the book where I do wish Gyatso and especially Malaya maybe spent a bit more time with Sozin, because of what's about to happen in just a few chapters' time. I see what the book tries to do with just Malaya is very familiar with Ulo, and she immediately senses that this is another Ulo, and so that maybe is the shortcut to she knows what she has to do when it comes to Sozin. But they maybe needed a little bit more page count here on this. But I think you get the point here as the reader here. At least the context, even if the characters are only kind of recently meeting Sozin here. But what are your thoughts on this interaction between the two groups here in this chapter?
Yeah, I think this is something that you sort of have been waiting for a while here, to see how sort of Gyatso reacts to Sozin, considering Gyatso's been very sort of outspoken in terms of what he thinks Sozin's sort of true aim is, which I think definitely doesn't, this sort of first meeting doesn't really sort of bode well for that sort of thought process to sort of change. Which, I mean, he's he's the prince of the Fire Nation, and they have this whole sort of idea and sort of air themselves. So I don't think it would have turned any better if he saw, sort of Sozin in any sort of situation, because, Sozin in his sort of public face persona, is the prince. Like, he's not, going to be as close as he is with just sort of Roku. So I don't think there was any other sort of way to go about that here. But yeah, you definitely do get the sense of, everyone's sort of on edge at this meeting here. Like, even though he's not threatening anything directly in this moment, he just wanted to sort of help his friend. It's definitely sort of comes across as we need to get going, we need to do this sort of thing, which I think is there's only so many ways you can sort of react to that in this sort of situation, especially with his two other companions there and sort of the wreckage of the village from the other Earthbenders. There's only so much they could do at this point in time.
And I suppose it does link into, I suppose, the characterization of Sozin they're going for here, which is that he always needs to be in control in all situations. And in a way, because of that, he has no capacity to kind of really properly trust anyone like new he meets anymore. And so he just immediately gives off a bad impression of like he just wants to use everyone around him. I think that's definitely what they're going for. But next chapter, chapter 41, hide from the world and hope for the best. So the equinox begins. We have Roku very much doubting himself as we're like seconds away from the big action about to happen. But he quickly realizes this is the moment where he has to really step up as the Avatar here. He has an opportunity to make something happen. He needs to do something like communicate with young Gib to get the truth about this situation, maybe stop the spirit from causing all of this if he can. But he tries to speak to young Gib. He does the full like Avatar voice and speaks with really fancy words. Kind of realizes, what am I doing? But nothing happens. He makes no connection whatsoever. They kind of reveal he kind of mistimed it a little bit here. Like the equinox doesn't quite start just yet, but then it finishes. But then it does start like immediately afterwards. They do note here that during the equinox, the power in the cave is even more of an empowerment than it was previously. So if it was like 100 times before, it's like at 1,000 times now. So even more power is what we're talking about here. So lots of power boosting type stuff going on here. It's noted here now that Roku can see his own aura as sapphire, and when he looks at Ulo, he sees Ulo's aura as amber. And Roku feels like he's like connected to the entire island. He can sense like the core of the island and everything going on with it. He feels like he can do anything with firebending. Like he feels he could do lightning if he had to, any color fire imaginable. And then all of a sudden he senses Ulo's aura spike because he's about to bend at him. And so he realizes, okay, I'm going to have to do some airbender dodging here to get out of the way. But it speaks to, I guess, when you're empowered, you also gain like energy sensing abilities is kind of seemingly what they go for here, because literally seeing people's colored auras is an interesting concept that, again, was alluded to before. Ulo could apparently see that Roku is the Avatar this way. Not super well explained, but it's an interesting concept. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, this is definitely something to note of, sort of the power that sort of comes with this sort of, ritual at this point in time in the island, in the sacred cave here, because it definitely has sort of a huge impact, and it's, something of note that, in theory, only sort of the chief, would sort of experience this, I'm guessing, because, they're the only one that's allowed during the ritual. So, the chief always sort of feeling this power and sort of, understanding of what, he could do this, like maybe that's something that sort of skewed his sort of perception over the years in terms of, what he wants to do, what his sort of true aim is. Because this is something that, Roku has sort of this thought of, his bending could be sort of like all these different things of what he wanted, what he could only sort of imagine doing generally, like to make the note of like, instead of burning, he can incinerate and like, warm and combust instead of a spark. Like he can do sort of like all the things that we know of that, people can do, but, usually require like, years and years of like arduous training and stuff like that. So it's something of, note of how sort of, affected they can be by this sort of power here. And like you said, the whole idea of being able to see the auras and sort of how, that sort of manifests in them, I think it's really something. It is, I guess, maybe a little bit too bad that we don't get it sort of more sort of explained. But I think, you get the idea of, how it reacts to people and their sort of character as, the story continues on. And even just from the bit where he notices it spikes, so he's able to sort of react in time. And I think it's, it's good that his first sort of, sort of thought here, at least in this initial moment, was sort of to evade like an airbender rather than sort of go on the attack like a firebender, which would have been his sort of normal reaction to things.
Yeah. I love the idea that just with pure power, you can just do any technique. even if it like is a technique that requires like specific things to do, like say lightning, separating the energies. Well, if you're so powerful, you can just effortlessly separate the energies. Doesn't matter if you can't do it like perfectly, because you can just forcibly separate it and generate lightning. Is a kind of cool concept that just with raw power you just force everything out. And this is the way most of this works. Like a lot of characters who have special techniques, as far as we're aware, it does come down to just like a raw power type thing. Like that, if you're a lava bender, it's a power thing. The only one that kind of feels a little bit weird these days is probably combustion bending, but even that is you kind of wonder like, Avatar state, if you try to do combustion bending, it's probably just the up close explosion firing it out of your forehead. That's the dangerous part. You don't want to risk it, but it's a cool concept. I think they did power boosts pretty well. Next chapter is chapter 42, The Dirt Eater. So basically the group, Malaya, Gyatso, and Sozin's team, they find the Earthbenders, a fight breaks out, and basically what we have is like Sozin's group going quite aggressive, but Malaya and Gyatso do some kind of fancy teamwork to kind of break through the defensive position here, where like Malaya is catapulted over the defensive line. She takes out one of them that way, but then she gets hit by Dalasai's rope dart by accident, drops her dagger. She gets hit a few times. Eventually they break through the initial kind of group of earthbenders, but then Malaya pursues the last earthbender and kind of fights her one-on-one. And what we get here is, again, linking into her arc here, is that as she fights here, she gets quite aggressive. She realizes that to fight this earthbender effectively, the only chance she has is to, again, be up close and just relentlessly pummel the earth armor with these kind of bamboo sticks that she has. And so it's this quite violent scene where she's just hammering this woman's arms, coated in earth, but then she breaks through and starts basically breaking the woman's arms. And Gyatso eventually has to step in to stop this violence, basically, of like, you've defeated her, now stop. She nearly let the quest for vengeance kind of get in the way of what they're really about here. Malaya does kind of step back, look at herself, and is a bit appalled by this. A lot of it is because she sort of sees the way Gyatso kind of looked at her in that moment, and she thinks, oh, have I now ruined my relationship with Gyatso? He sees me as this, savage on the island. I'm no better than the Ulo who just wants to kill all outsiders. Am I like that? Am I broken? A lot of these topics begin to come up. Is she actually just like an Amihan? And so she's focused more on like, hey, do I still have a relationship with Gyatso? And so she just basically really casually lets Dalasai keep her dagger, because Dalasai comes up to apologize for the accidental hit. And so this is where Dalasai gets a hold of some of the island's fancy metal for the first time, which will come into play in like the final chapter, basically. But yes, Malaya's arc very much continuing here. But you see the nuance here where she does have the anger, and that's real, but she is able to look back and reflect on it in I think the right way, and realize that no, she likely is better than that. It's just, the timing of what's about to happen doesn't work out super well for her, as we'll sort of see. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, no, I think definitely the heat of the moment sort of got to her at this point in time. Like, she doesn't seem to have that sort of edge all the time. But, in this, with everything that sort of happened, it just sort of built up to this moment here. And, the coordination that they have, before this, I think was really good. Like, it's, again, just another point of showing, how well Gyatso and Malaya sort of can work together here, which I think is, it's a nice thing to see, considering sort of how everything sort of ends up. But yeah, it's an interesting way of sort of, I guess, catching up to the Earthbenders and sort of ending their issue without having any more sort of, news from them going forward. Although we do get to hear a little bit about them, when we get to the end.
Mm-hmm. Next chapter is 43, which is Not Enough. So Roku dodges Ulo's attacks. Ulo at this point reveals that What he wants to do is to sacrifice Roku to young Gib so he can have the power wherever he goes. Like he can take the power out of the cave and stuff like this. We'll discuss if this makes any sense in a second, but Roku continues to dodge and bend defensively, really being careful with how much power he's outputting just to stay on the defense, but realizes to do what he needs to do, he has to attack and resolve this threat. He has to incapacitate Ulo and speak to young Gib. That's going to be the only way to actually figure things out. So he's going to switch from airbender style to firebender style, and he's about to go on offense here, which, given how like insanely empowered he is and how crazy his attacks were previously, is going to be interesting to actually see. So yeah, immediately the big thing here is Ulo, I think, as we learn later in later chapters, doesn't know a lot about this. There's some of this stuff reveals that we get that make me think that this is a plan out of complete desperation that wouldn't actually do anything. I think you could channel the energy into Roku and sort of forcibly activate the Avatar state that way, and like empower Roku with the energy of the cave, because he's the Avatar and can contain that much energy. But I don't understand any sort of a logic that would lead to somehow him killing Roku, allowing him to then contain more energy. I think if he tried to do what he is planning to do, he'd probably just blow himself up in the same way that like when spirits go inside humans, there's the threat of effectively like killing them. I'm guessing that's kind of the idea of what might happen. It might be slightly different because he's so trained at using empowered bending, but I don't think it's like it makes that much sense that he'd be able to like be permanently empowered because he kills Roku, because I don't see how the Avatar's like vessel-like abilities would like transfer over to Ulo in any way. So this, I guess, is just born out of like madness, desperation, because he's lost control of everything. But what are your thoughts on what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, getting the final sort of reveal of this is interesting, and yeah, it definitely does feel a bit more on sort of the desperation of, all these people are coming to the island over and over time. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do to sort of, protect my people. But it doesn't feel... And again, it's kind of hard to tell because we don't know sort of what sort of truths Ulos has said and, what sort of, fact and fiction. So, there's a lot in the air there. And even for us as sort of the viewer to sort of try to discern what he really sort of means, which I think, is probably, the point that they're sort of going for here as well. But it definitely doesn't seem like, from what we know at least, like you're saying, like, him becoming a new vessel for this sort of spiritual sort of energy, it doesn't feel like that would sort of work out, especially when we learn, what's actually, who or whom young Beeb actually is in that sort of situation. Like, it seems even less likely that he would be able to, put this plan into action unless he knows some sort of ritual for transferring spiritual energy that we don't know of and that we've never really heard of. It definitely doesn't feel like it's something that he's going to be able to do, because I think, like you said, if Roku had the power, it probably would force his transformation, since we've sort of seen that before when avatars get sort of like an external influence that they can sort of activate their own sort of power. Now, would it like, quadruple fold him, past already the Avatar state? Like, I don't know, like what's more, like in the Avatar state, like other than it always sort of being on and sort of getting lost in it, like how much more would he be able to do other than, sort of move continents and stuff like that? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see, I guess, maybe from sort of a technical standpoint, even though it would be very sort of scary to see. But yeah, it's definitely something of note, because even with Ulo being, like you're saying, like extra enhanced in training, and we're assuming that he's been in the Equinox many years at this point, right? So he's felt his power over time, so maybe he thinks that like you're saying, he's used to the power, so he can sort of, contain it more, maybe. But if he hasn't figured it out already, which, I don't know, this seems like something that he probably would have already tried, It doesn't seem like this has a very high chance of success.
Mm. Yeah, it's a weird one because I think a lot of the inspiration for this is like Escape from the Spirit World Roku and the whole like he activates the Avatar state through the like the jewel kind of thing accidentally, and they're kind of going for that kind of angle, sort of. Um, but yeah, a lot of the logic doesn't maybe make as more sense because Ulo says sacrifices don't do anything, but now he's planning to sacrifice Roku. So did he just replace who he was sacrificing here, and the sacrifices actually did mean something, and he was lying when he actually said he was telling the truth, and it's very confusing all of a sudden. And then like, what is the ritual? Like, does he have to siphon energy in some way? Because when we get the explanation later on, it feels pretty clear cut of just like it happens automatically, and like he's not really doing anything. It's just the place gets imbued with energy, and that explains it. That Ulo comes across as someone who knows how to make use of a kind of large amount of energy, but he's not spiritual because he doesn't know how to communicate with young Gib like at all. And he notes that like Roku would know more about that spiritual side of things. He has like a technical knowledge of like energy to a certain degree, but it doesn't feel like it's kind of more than that. And then, like you say, there's even stuff like even the thing with the Avatar state is kind of weird because the gimmick of the Avatar state is that like it's powered by cosmic energy, which is basically limitless energy. Whereas this is powered by spirit energy, which is kind of confusing, and it just feels like they don't want you to maybe think about it too much. But just so I don't even think it's that complicated. I think they could have got some of these details and ordered them in the right way to make it come across a little bit better. It just feels like they gave up a little bit here towards the end, but it's still mostly, I think, fine what we actually... Next chapter is chapter 44, which is called Beyond Repair. So the group with Malaya and Sozin and everyone, they reach the cave, but at this point suddenly Sozin decides that only he and Malaya are going to go down into the cave. He wants Malaya to be his guide and doesn't want anyone else there. Again, they're kind of forced to reluctantly agree because they feel kind of if they disagree with Sozin, he'll attack everyone or do something like that. Gyatso, of course, is super cautious, very worried for Malaya, but he does trust her to make the right choice. He hugs her, which is revealed to be her first ever hug or like contact that's like this intimate like ever. And it's a big kind of moment for her. She asks him if people are born broken, and Gyatso says that in his mind there's always a way to heal. And so she says that, hey, after all this is done, can I go back with you to the Southern Air Temple? And he happily agrees with this. But as she and Sozin walk into the cave, we get her thought process, which is that she is either going to kill Sozin in there or die trying in order to sort of protect the clan and everyone else. Because in her mind, she views it as like Sozin is someone who needs to die. Like he's going to cause some kind of chaos in the future, even beyond the island. She just gets that sense from him. Which is why I was saying earlier on that it's like maybe we needed a little bit more time with Malaya and Sozin together to fully make this moment of her making this kind of shocking kind of do or die situation really hit as hard as it needs to. It still works. It's just to be absolutely perfect, I think it needed a bit more time. But again, I like Sozin and his control. It's easier for him to control one non-bender guiding him than have to mess around with his own team. Plus, he seems a little bit cautious of Gyatso and potentially how skilled he is, maybe, and that's an interesting one. But your thoughts on chapter 44?
Yeah, no, he's definitely cautious, and this definitely is, this is sort of the standard MO for sort of Sozin and sort of how he interacts with people and different situations where he, has something that he wants and he doesn't necessarily want other people sort of involved with the situation. I think Dalsai sort of mutters the whole library thing, so it's definitely just a repeat of that sort of situation here, which, I wonder if things would have turned out differently otherwise, but, this is sort of the way that they sort of set things up. But I like this moment between Malaya and Gyatso and sort of, the idea that, things aren't completely from, sort of repair, even though in her mind, Sozin and his sort of actions is already kind of, beyond repair. So it's sort of this sort of, contrast of both sides of, irredeemable, maybe redeemable sort of situations, which, is what they're sort of going for in this, sort of whole idea of things, which is, just something, a note and of interest.
Hmm. Next, chapter 45 is A Spirit of All Nations. So, very interesting title. And yeah, Roku starts to offensively bend. And basically, it is so powerful that like we basically open up in the middle of the action, and Ulo's like, "Stop firebending! You're gonna wreck the place," because yeah, it's like thousandfold more powerful bending that Roku can barely contain. His standard fire punches are like cannon blasts. Is kind of the way to describe it. It's just tearing the cave apart, basically. And he then tries to kind of fly around using fire, which works, but he has no control. So he just like booster rockets into the ceiling, nearly kills himself against the ceiling. As he's falling, he nearly dies crashing into the ground, and only saves himself by airbending to cushion his fall. And they also address a little bit of a kind of maybe potential plot hole up to now, which is how did Roku survive his fall like through the island to get down to the cave in the first place back in like Roku alone? Well, it's because he inadvertently airbent back then, and this is just the reveal of it. So he's actually been able to airbend for a little bit. It's just here's him realizing it properly for the first time here. So now with airbending and firebending, he's able to kind of fly a little bit easier, kind of combining them together. And he makes his decision here of like, okay, firebending, too lethal. I'll do a really powerful airbending attack to knock him out. And yeah, he just sends Ulo hurtling into a wall with a big blast of air, and Ulo gets knocked out against the wall. Well, I suppose we'll talk about the fight first. What are your thoughts about Roku airbending here and him beating Ulo, at least in this stage of the fight?
Yeah, no, I thought this was, it's a good way to sort of, show, I guess, sort of how powerful he is in this moment without even, activating the Avatar state or anything like that. Like this is just spiritual energy enhanced Avatar, right? Like this is in cosmic enhanced powers. So it's still pretty strong. It's still pretty crazy what he's able to do. Like, he fires Ben's sort of like white fire. He can do sort of, all of these things that he wouldn't necessarily think he could do. Like he's seemingly been able to sort of like force unblock airbending, even though the way that he's using it is sort of just sort of, like his sort of native element as they discuss later on. But yeah, it's cool to see, him sort of, be this sort of skilled in this sort of moment here, and sort of Ulo, once he's able to sort of just use two elements, he's able to sort of overcome Ulo, who even though he's been trained and everything and has been a bender for X amount of time, even with this sort of spiritual power is sort of quickly sort of overwhelmed, just showing you sort of how overpowering the Avatar can be, even with just two elements at their disposal, like just having two different ones that you can use at any time, even untrained, is just sort of very sort of oppressive.
Yeah, because it's an interesting kind of idea where like Roku has a bit of a kind of almost like cheat code when it comes to like being empowered like this, where it doesn't matter how much energy he channels through himself because he can handle it because he's the Avatar, and that's like the top level vessel type thing. They have a spirit in them, whereas anyone else, they could like overload themselves if they tried to channel too much energy. Even I guess an Ulo is still just a normal person in all of this, even though he's skilled at it. So he can only go so far without like risking himself, whereas Roku can just go overboard if he has to. But yeah, I like the way they describe bending empowerment consistently. Even one of the other things, I forget if it's this chapter or if it's the previous one, they address not his bending power, but just like him moving around, that he just feels energized in that way as well. Like he just has unlimited energy. Like he's not ever going to get tired. He can like move a bit faster, jump a little bit higher as well, which is an interesting one when it comes to like, oh yeah, I like that would be, I guess, a sort of empowerment for like a non-bender if they were in the cave, is that they have chi. Non-benders still have chi. It's just they can't like use it for like an energy based thing, but they'd still have extra energy in their body, which I guess could help fuel them just being better physically. I wouldn't say they quite go with the idea that it's like Super Saiyan type thing of just they get like speed boosts as such, but like there seems to be a like 5% like physical enhancement kind of thing going on here. I don't know. Did you get that from your reading of the way Roku described it?
Yeah, no, it definitely seems that way. Like even just on like a base level, just being near the cave seems to sort of give off an extra sense, especially the people that are more sort of like attuned to that sort of thing. They seem to be able to sort of sense that sort of aspect of things. So I wouldn't be surprised if, a non-bender from the island was able to sort of take advantage of that in some sort of form or fashion, especially since, like we keep talking about Malaya, like she already seems like she's pretty enhanced just from like a normal person's sort of standpoint, like being able to see so well in the dark and hear so far. Like I don't know if that's maybe a thing of them being on the island and being proximity to the cave. So like if they were, more connected or closer to the cave itself, would they have even more of a sense of that? But it definitely feels like they would have, something extra just being in there, especially considering we know that, Roku was being doused before. So the fact that he's like completely 100% and even better than 100% sort of speaks to that.
Mm-hmm. Next, we go into chapter 46, Her Final Act. Not at all an ominous title, but let's get into this one. Malaya plans how to take out Sozin as they walk through the caves. Her plan is to, as they go through a broken section of tunnel, she'll crawl through first and prepare to ambush Sozin when he comes through, because it will be a bit awkward. But he's able to predict this, and again, because he's the firebender, he's in control. When they do get to that section where they have to crawl through, he goes through first. Malaya still prepares herself. She grabs a sharp rock at this point, kind of wishes she hadn't given away the dagger. But she grabs a sharp rock and follows him through. He kicks her in the face and starts attacking her here. She is able to sort of like push through it and like stabs him with the rock, but he just headbutts her and then kills her with firebending. So we get this super brutal, super sudden death of one of our main characters here in the book, as Malaya is just pretty viciously kind of killed here by Sozin as they're making their way towards Roku and Ulo where they are, with just the sort of like ending note being, Malaya being like, she had tried, at least. That's the sort of idea. So it's that situation where we'll get it as well from Sozin's perspective afterwards, but like they both went in and basically in both of their heads, they both realized they were each going to try and kill the other. And Sozin, I guess, is a little bit fresher coming into this. Malaya's been through a lot of fights. He's a bit more on it and just generally more powerful. And she gets taken out here. And obviously it certainly gets across the idea of Sozin doing this makes you hate him even more. Any sense of you feeling, but he really cares for Roku, kind of falls away at this point because he kills Malaya in this moment. And it's interesting because it is still partial self-defense, because she was planning to kill him as well. But it's just the fact that like you grow to really care for Malaya up to this point, and so this just feels rough when you come out of this chapter and she's gone. But what are your thoughts on this pretty impactful chapter here, Her Final Act?
Yeah, no, it definitely does come across as like a pretty sort of stark thing. And yeah, they both were sort of, going after each other in this moment. But, I think, you try to sort of figure out what's sort of the moral idea here and sort of who had the better right in this situation. And of course, we know the sort of ending of things, so we sort of know how it's going to play out. But it's still, sort of a shocking thing to see this sort of happening, especially considering, how they've been building up Malaya up until this point here. But yeah, definitely, would this have been a different situation if she hadn't been through a couple fights already and was trying to save her village here? Like, I don't know. I think, in this sort of situation, despite everything, like things probably would have turned out the same way regardless. But Yeah, I don't know. They came to these sort of conclusions here. I think, they build up the idea of, both of them sort of, seeing the other's sort of perspective and what they're sort of, willing to do and how they're going to sort of act in the future here. So they try to make it, a point for us as the reader that, this is sort of like a do or die situation, even though, it's not necessarily, a long sort of premeditation thing, but it's long enough and they have enough reasoning, and I guess they have enough of their own sort of history and logical backing to sort of, warrant this sort of a vicious attack to happen.
Mm. Yeah, and then I think the thing, the way you really hate Sozin for this is more that, like, Malaya does this out of a sense of, like, I suppose trying to protect her clan from Sozin, if he's allowed to just freely kind of come back out. Probably has the power to do whatever he wants with the clan because they've obviously already been attacked by the Earthbenders, and especially if, like, Roku has to kill Ulo, they might not even have leadership coming out of this, so it could be particularly bad. Whereas Sozin, I suppose, ends up like, yeah, why does he feel like he has to kill Malaya? Why does he radiate this kind of energy to where she attacks him? It's because he immediately gives the wrong impression to everyone and is ultimately, I suppose, still just trying to protect his reputation, that he ultimately feels like he has to take out Malaya and then maybe Gyatso when he comes back, and who knows who else, to just limit the amount of people who knows that he's off on this mission by himself, that he's trying to keep a secret for his future plans. And that scheming is more why you view him as being in the wrong overall, I think. But we'll get into that here, because chapter 47, that near miss with Destiny, is from Sozin's point of view immediately afterwards. We see that he is a bit shaken by this. Like, this is his second time killing someone, but this, they describe it as, this is more of the first one where he purposely went in with the intent to kill, whereas it was more of a reactionary self-defense the first time out. He can't bring himself to look at Malaya's body. And we get some interesting stuff here where it feels like he more kind of outs himself here as the being more openly kind of villainous, or like you dislike him more here because he's like, he admired like Malaya's strength, but they kind of go like what most tough independent women, like if they did too much, he'd have to like take them out. And he immediately goes from that into, oh, and if Dalasai ever steps out of line, I'm going to kill her too. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is that bad path, the kind of slippery slope here of like, he saw the reaction to the first kill, now the second kill here hasn't affected him as much as he thought, and he's immediately like, I guess this is just a way to get rid of people, and I'm okay with doing it. And it's just become very easy for him, and now he will truly do anything to get what he wants. So yeah, he then makes his way through the caves. He finds Roku meditating at the end, when suddenly Ulo appears. Ulo has woken up, and Ulo is about to kill the vulnerable Roku. Sozin powerfully firebends, but the second he firebends, because he's obviously in the empowered cave at this point, it all goes horribly wrong. Basically, unable to control the power in any way. He effectively blows himself up. They never quite describe what exactly happens here, but it seems like he tries to do some long-range fire attack, but he just explodes himself kind of up close. It's obviously enough to distract Ulo, but he injures himself quite badly here. So what are your thoughts on this Sozin focused chapter?
Yeah, another one where we get his sort of introspective thoughts here, and sort of maybe his descent into madness, maybe. Yeah, it's definitely, something to note of him just sort of being, okay more and more with the situation at hand. Like, this definitely feels like he's sort of seeing that he can do anything to sort of achieve his goals, and that any sort of obstacle, just has to sort of be removed, which is, a sad thing to see, but that's sort of his character here. So it's definitely, it's where we get to see his sort of, arc become of where he eventually sort of ends up. But yeah, it's definitely, he's just not really, he has his goals and his schemes, and that's sort of what he's sort of about here. But yeah, I think, him going into sort of the cave here, I think he does note sort of the extra power that he has and stuff like that. But he's definitely, him out of everyone, really shouldn't try to use the power in the cave, because he definitely has, even less sort of control, other than sort of like his standard sort of airbending sort of mastery and techniques like that, but nothing with sort of the enhanced nature that this cave can sort of give you here. So it's it's not too surprising that it sort of immediately sort of like backfires on himself. And yeah, it's just sort of like a first time firebender trying to sort of like use too much power and not projecting it out from yourself. It just sort of builds up too close to your own body.
Yeah, it's just the funny thing where like Roku's lack of confidence, his cautious nature, like saves him his first time doing like firebending while enhanced, and back in the earlier chapters. It's a funny thing
Yeah.
where like, because Sozin's more powerful, but he does it I suppose 100% all the time. He just overdoes it here completely. Next up, we have chapter 48, which is called Fading Warmth. So Roku immediately snaps out of his meditation because an explosion goes off, and he finds a badly injured Sozin at the cave entrance. He goes down to try and help him, and he turns around to see Ulo standing on the kind of central mound of the cave in the light. And so, left with no option, and Ulo about to bring basically a kind of river into the room, the only way he can save Sozin is to attack with the intent to kill Ulo. That's the only way to guarantee he and Sozin make it out of this alive. So Roku charges up a full power firebending attack while like double enhanced here basically. And yeah, they just describe here that he builds up an attack, but then he holds it and holds it and holds it and then unleashes it, and effectively he does this, like they describe it as like it's like an iridescent like fire tornado aimed directly at Ulo. So it goes like through the mound at the center of the cave, through Ulo, opens up the roof of the cave as well, effectively destroying the sacred cave. It's this like basically most powerful firebending attack we've ever seen, probably. I'd love to see some sort of a visual of this, just to see how crazy it looks. But it's this devastating thing where like he kills Ulo, and theoretically you end the chapter not really knowing like, wait, has he killed himself? Has he killed Sozin as well? Because I don't think he was maybe expecting the cave collapse as well. But what are your thoughts on this? Roku kills Ulo here with a big attack.
Yeah, I mean, considering we were just talking about how sort of, restrained Roku was in all of his previous attacks, it's like this is that one moment where he just sort of, just sort of like Malaya before, it's just sort of he snaps in this moment and he sort of falls back on sort of what he sort of knows, and he just goes all out in this moment here. Like the fact that it's, not even just sort of like a simple fire blast, which probably would have done the same thing. He charges it up. Like they make note of how how much time and just sort of the build up in this moment of this sort of attack, which I don't know. I mean, I guess emotions are running high, so sort of makes sense that he would sort of maybe do it in this sort of moment in time. But considering everything that we've seen before, like even something on sort of like a smaller scale would have probably still taken out Ulo, despite sort of him bringing down sort of this massive amount of water on him. So it's something to see. It definitely would be cool to have a visual for this. Yeah, you definitely don't know what's going to happen, because it really does. I mean, we already know from previous chapters that sort of this battle that they were having was like shaking the cave and shaking sort of the surrounding areas by the blast that Roku's been setting off, and that was him just being sort of restrained in sort of what he's been doing. So for him to do a all-out attack here, this is a huge feat.
Mm-hmm. Next, chapter 49, Two Wicks. So what we basically have here is like a dying Roku walks through the Southern Air Temple Sanctuary feeling like he has failed completely as the Avatar. And he just kind of notes that, well, at least my era as the Avatar was a short one, and we can move on and have a, ideal situation for an air Avatar to take over, and things will be better. Then Kyoshi appears to speak to him and says that he has not failed. Roku's very upset about the fact that he was forced to kill Ulo, but of course Kyoshi defends his actions, saying that in doing that, you have saved other people. You didn't really have a choice. He was never going to stop in another way. But Roku argues that there should have been another way, and gets to the point of basically, we can't kill our way to peace. And this sort of stops Kyoshi from speaking. She goes silent at this. She can't really defend this. There'll be more context behind Kyoshi's words here, I think, later on. But she goes silent until she leaves him with the final statement, which is that the only true mistake we make is not looking within. And so Roku realizes, okay, my time as the Avatar is not up. He wakes up, and then he earthbends for the first time. He sort of like channels kind of Kyoshi to a certain degree, and earthbends for the first time to save himself and Sozin from the rubble of the cave collapse. And that is 2 wicks here, which is a very cool scene, because finally, like, okay, Kyoshi coming to play, past Avatar scene, but you almost ended with like, that was weird. She didn't really say that much. But when you have the context from a couple of chapters from now, it means a lot more. The big thing that they get across here is, of course, Kyoshi's always been on the side of, do what you have to do to achieve justice, even if it is killing. And you shouldn't feel bad about that necessarily, but Roku does feel bad. He doesn't feel that this was the right way to do things. There should always be another way, basically, which for Roku is particularly interesting given the decision like he will make in the future when it comes to Sozin. And I think a lot of this thematically, I think, comes together pretty well, because I think the series and its kind of overall kind of view on things is saying that Roku's correct, that yes, killing should always be an absolute last resort and not something you always defend, but that's just the situation that we have here. But yeah, you're left a little bit confused by, only true mistake is not looking within. So she's, I guess, sort of praising him for being able to reflect on this choice that he realizes was maybe not the best one. That's your initial takeaway, I suppose, for now. But what are your thoughts on this interesting scene, our first past life scene for Roku?
Yeah, it definitely can go a bunch of different ways, even before you sort of have the extra context, because just him being able to sort of look in gives him the strength to do, in order to survive coming up here. But there's even more to that here. But yeah, I like that he's finally able to sort of connect with his sort of past life here. He's mentioned before that, he's been trying to do this, but he hasn't gotten anywhere sort of close to it. So of course, the way that it always sort of seems to work in these situations is that, the most sort of drastic, desperate moment that you're in is when you're able to sort of, let go and sort of connect with your past and with your sort of true self here. So, following the theme of many other times and other avatars so far that we know of, this is when he's able to sort of connect with Kyoshi here, and sort of, this is after him sort of having, such sort of introspective sort of thoughts on his sort of time and his era as an avatar, even if it's so short up until this point. And yeah, we know, what's sort of going to happen later on, but it's still something to note of, this is sort of another sort of low moment for him, considering everything that he's been going through. And he was trying to do things the right way, but things sort of just, sort of got out of hand, and showing his sort of, maybe a bit naivety in terms of what he thought he could do at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Next, chapter 50, Come Back for the Body. So we started, it's a Gyatso point of view chapter. I believe actually the first one in the book, because they do the interesting kind of thing where every other Gyatso kind of focus chapter was actually a Malaya chapter, or Roku was in it. And so this is after her death, the first time we're actually getting his point of view. And he witnesses Kozuru and Dalasai basically discussing Sozin and the idea of, should we leave early or stay? And like, what is the right thing to do to get across like how loyal we are to him, and what might he do to us if we make the wrong choice? And they note that he is someone who will do anything to get what he wants. So they stick around thinking that that's the best choice. As Gyatso spots the arrival of Sister Disha with Lola and Amra, the Sky Bison, there. So we have some kind of reinforcements here. They then go to search for Roku after Gyatso kind of quickly catches her up to speed. They then witness Roku's giant attack from like the previous chapters, and then are able to see Roku and save him from the rubble. and are surprised, of course, to find, okay, Roku's down here injured, Sozin's injured. They find Ulo's body, but there's no sign of Malaya just yet. And so we end with a very worried Gyatso feeling that, like, why is the last of the four big characters kind of not really down here? What's going on? So I think there's some interesting stuff here. I think that the Kozuru Dalsai scene especially, I think, is quite interesting because it's like, I think it's like the first scene in the whole book where you get them discussing Sozin together without him being near them. So you get a little bit more kind of openness about their view on him, which is kind of interesting. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, no, they definitely were a lot more sort of open in their thoughts of, would he actually, like hate him after their death, or, would he just sort of let them go? Like, how would he sort of like, try to keep them quiet or not quiet if things happen? Like, I think, they're noting how sort of ruthless he really is now that they've been around him for, I guess, an extended period of time here. And yeah, so sort of listening, but he's sort of, just sort of wondering just sort of what to do in general until he finds, Sister Disha, sort of catches her up to speed and everything. And it's something to note of, the Sky Bison having the connection in order to sort of get help without, Gyatso actually asking for it, more so showing sort of the connection is back with his, airbending and everything, and that links back to, his spirit, his animal guide and everything like that. So I like that sort of connection there. And then, yeah, them seeing sort of, Roku sort of figuring out how to get out from under the rubble at this sort of last sort of moment here, something a feat of him sort of finally being able to connect one more time with his sort of true avatarness.
Mm-hmm. Next chapter is a pretty big one. Lots to discuss in this one. Chapter 51, Let Go. So at the start here, Gyatso catches Roku up with what happened. It's revealed that Roku's been unconscious, basically asleep for 3 days. Roku apologizes for killing Ulo and says, Gyatso, you were right about that. But Gyatso doesn't really scold Roku for this. I think he's sort of understanding of this, but also distracted because Roku then asks about Malaya, and Gyatso reveals that her body was found in the tunnels like the previous day. And so Roku then kind of holds Gyatso as Gyatso cries about the loss of Malaya. This is where Disha comes in to speak with Roku alone. And we get the big giant reveal about her, basically why I guess she was chosen to be his master here. And that is that she used to be a companion of Avatar Kyoshi, and was actually her last airbender companion. And she reveals that she was with Kyoshi right up until the last 2 years of Kyoshi's life. And she left because of an incident that happened that was sort of reflective of a lot of the time with Kyoshi over the years they spent together, which is that she feels that in her advanced age, Kyoshi had lost perspective on the value of individual lives and effectively had been dealing with way too many conflicts by just eliminating the threat without maybe considering another option. And the big incident that caused her to leave was that Kyoshi basically killed a kind of Dao Fei, kind of cruel Dao Fei leader. But this man was the son of a man she had killed in a similar way years prior. So in Disha's mind, like, Kyoshi had like created the next threat that she needed to defeat, basically, and this was too much like death for her, and so Disha left. She told the air nomads about what happened, and as a result of this, no other air nomads wanted to travel with Kyoshi after this, with the implication being that if you go on a mission with Kyoshi, it's highly likely she'll probably kill someone at the end of it, and you'll be attached to that, basically, and they don't want to be involved in that. So she then says that the Avatar, the world needs basically changes with the eras, and that right now they don't need a Kyoshi, they need a Roku. And she kind of praises Roku for, in a way, like thinking about that, yes, there wasn't another option, there should be another option rather than just killing, and the fact that he's thinking about that is good. Roku does ask the question of like, hey, do you know how Kyoshi died? And Disha doesn't, but speculates, and I think it's meant to be an accurate speculation, that she feels that Kyoshi realized that sometimes people see us more clearly than we see ourselves, and she let go. As in, 2 years after this big incident on her own, she eventually decided that, hey, maybe the reason they left me was right, maybe this is a problem, and so she just, I guess, based on the technical stuff we have about Kyoshi, just decided to stop doing the kind of immortality technique, the meditation technique thing that Lao Ge taught her, and just died 2 years later. We don't know the exact details here, but this feels like, I think, a pretty good way to explain Kyoshi's death. She wasn't defeated by anyone, but it's a reflection on her approach as the Avatar, and also maybe a little bit on maybe people in Avatar are not meant to live that long as well, that we don't know the full scope of what that does to you to live more than twice a normal lifespan, basically. So super interesting stuff here, definitely one of the highlight chapters of the whole book. But what are your thoughts on this big chapter here?
Yeah, no, definitely. It answers some questions. It gives us some more questions. Like, I think it's good that we're sort of getting the understanding of sort of, the later life of Kyoshi and just sort of how, the avatars are working in their eras. I mean, he also mentioned earlier that, the avatar is the one that's needed in that moment here. And, we get sort of the same sort of thing here from Sister Disha about, Kyoshi was, her way of doing things, seemed to be needed in the beginning, especially considering, what we know at least of like the lawlessness of, the people in her era. So, there could be some sort of, logical, moral, maybe reason for the way that she was acting the way that she was acting. But, definitely over the course of a time, definitely seemed like that wasn't necessarily the answer to everything here. So I like that, Roku's sort of getting this sort of perspective here. He's sort of understanding his predecessor in even more sort of a direct way rather than just sort of like, journals or papers or other people's sort of perspective of things. This is like firsthand account of a previous avatar here, which he never even sort of, thought of sort of asking sort of Sister Disha sort of what was her sort of history here and why she was sort of picked to train him here. So I like that. That's a really good sort of way of, just sort of connecting things together here in this moment here and sort of, giving Roku some sort of hope that, maybe he isn't sort of, messing up everything, that, he's just going some of the sort of, growing pains of being an avatar. And he, hasn't technically sort of, mastered, any other element yet. Like he's only just recently had access to other ones. And those were sort of enhanced via the cave. So does it even count? No, he doesn't even know that himself yet. But no, I like this a lot. It definitely gives you a lot to sort of work with. I mean, yeah, there's some things that are still sort of up in the air, I guess, if you really want to consider it. But, you can sort of extrapolate going forward, sort of what happened and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's gone down pretty well. It's like, yeah, this feels like a satisfying way to deal with, like, how does the longest lived avatar die, given that she theoretically could have lived longer. And it's that, no, eventually she did come to realize that her approach was a bit problematic, and that, yeah, that advanced age takes a toll. And that would be an interesting thing to explore in the future when it comes to stuff like someone like a Lao Ge. We already thought of him as a bit of a crazy character, but like how much of that is just because of like living that long, and especially someone with so much power to live that long. Like there's the real sense that like you start to not be as human anymore, and you lean more into the kind of godlike view of the avatar that Yang Chen in the Avatar State in her books kind of like approached kind of doing to a certain degree. So she made the right choice, and going a little bit back to chapter 49 to Wix, the advice of like why did We Can't Kill Our Way to Peace cause Kyoshi to go silent? Because she has no answer to that. She couldn't kill her way to peace, but maybe tried to, that sort of thing. That's maybe a fair criticism of her. And then why her advice is the only true mistake we make is not looking within. Clearly, because it took people basically standing up to her and saying, hey, I don't think you are able to see yourself properly here. This is how I feel about you. maybe Kyoshi hadn't been looking within, but Roku very much is. And so that's why we get him going on to become a very like conscientious avatar who's very aware of the four nations and their value, and he's heavily active in negotiations across the world and stuff like that, rather than battles necessarily. So I like the extra context this gives to sort of why Kyoshi acted in that way in the previous chapter as well, which is quite interesting to just talk about there. And yeah, it's nice for Roku, I think, to learn that even the legendary Kyoshi, from a certain point of view, can be viewed as flawed as well. That you know how you feel now after ending a threat by killing them. Well, Kyoshi did that a lot, and it was sort of her go-to thing. Like, that's not necessarily something you want to maybe aspire to be. But every avatar has their pros and cons, that sort of idea. And I like the nuance to it as well, because it's a lot of times the fandom, I think, gets quite negative with Roku when it comes to why didn't he just kill Sozin? Whereas this is very much presenting the idea of like, well, here's the kind of moral logic or something like that behind why he didn't, because he knows what it feels like to kill the enemy. And especially if that enemy is his friend or former friend, you understand why Roku is maybe never going to make that decision. And the reality of it is that, I suppose, within the general tone of Avatar, it's never going to advocate for kill the person, as evidenced by like Aang and Ozai, I think. But what are your thoughts on some of those kind of deeper themes with Roku as the Avatar and Kyoshi and her legacy as the Avatar?
Yeah, so I think, it gives you a really good sense of the larger perspective of sort of, the avatars and their sort of history, and, specifically on Roku, considering what we sort of know about him. And yeah, this is coming from sort of like a after the fact sort of, sense here, but I think it's still, it still works in the larger scheme of things. And I think it definitely gives us a better perspective of, like you're saying, like why he acted the way that he did, throughout his, career and his life as the Avatar. Because it definitely, from just seeing, the show or anything like that, like considering everything that we know that happens after the fact, it's like, you could have sort of, ended the issue there in the beginning, but what would that have caused, later on down the lane? Like, would Zuko have ever had this sort of, idea of, maybe the Avatar isn't the worst in the world because, he had this sort of lineage of, history dealing with his sort of family directly. So there's, so many ifs and situations that, can come out of these things and, the generations and everything like that. And, Kyoshi just happened to live long enough that she got to see sort of the errors of her ways, directly in front of her because of her earlier actions earlier in her life here. So I thought that, it's a really good way to sort of see this and sort of a different life. And yeah, the whole idea of, Avatar in general is just, sort of showing tolerance and compassion. So that's sort of, the lens that they're, viewing all of these stories through.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we have chapter 52, Leverage. Also a big chapter because this is Roku and Sozin actually getting a chance to talk. And this is particularly interesting, of course, because it's pseudo kind of breaking canon to a certain degree, because, of course, in 306, Avatar and the Fire Lord, it was said that, like, we didn't see each other again for, like, 12 years afterwards. They get away with it here because it's so close to the starting point that it's still after this effectively 12 years. So it's a slight adjustment, but I think it's important because of what they do on both sides of this, as we'll see in this and the final chapter. But what happens here is Roku and Sozin talks. Sozin admits that he lied to Roku about like not giving him the full details on the mission, and that yes, he was here for the power, but that he only found out the full details about, like, you can't take the power from the island later on, and that is why he came back. He does apologize to Roku for lying about the whole situation, and then asks if there's anything that he can do to get Roku to forgive him. And I think Sozin expects that, like, Roku maybe won't, like, pick him up on this, or it'll be something very small. But Roku actually decides that, no, I'm the Avatar now. I'm going to take advantage of you offering this to me and, do some Avatar stuff here. So Roku wants two things from Sozin. The first is to make sure that Lombok Island retains its independence, and that means like negotiate with your father, do what you have to do, but make sure that this place is in control of itself, basically, coming out of that. And then the second thing is that he kind of reflects on the world and realizes that the kind of era that Kyoshi has maybe created means that a lot of the nations are doing things more behind the scenes rather than open, because they were so afraid of Kyoshi coming after them, that he realizes he needs to take a look at things, and in a way, people need to learn to not be overly suspicious of people and, like, you know, just have a more peaceful outlook. And so he feels the world should learn from the air nomads, and so the Fire Nation should open a temple, an air temple, in the Fire Nation capital as a way to teach other nations their philosophy. Sozin agrees to this, of course, and then we end the chapter with kind of Roku reflecting on the way his relationship is with Sozin now, which is that he is still friends with Sozin. They're still close, he's still important to him, but he is aware that the dynamic has changed. Mainly because Roku is different. He's kind of grown, and he doesn't need Sozin as much as he did in the past. Like, he needed badly someone like Sozin in the aftermath of Yasuo's death, but he doesn't need someone like that as much anymore. They're still friends, but with their roles now, Avatar and Firelord, things are going to be a little bit different. But I think Roku has a pretty healthy view on the way their relationship has changed, and will contrast this with the last chapter and Sozin's kind of similar reflection. So what are your thoughts on this one? A big Roku-Sozin discussion, and Roku in a way deciding to kind of leverage their friendship here at the end.
Yeah, I think this is, Roku finally sort of understanding, sort of his new position and sort of embracing it to some degree. Like, he's able to sort of, see that he actually has, some responsibilities. He can't sort of, run away from it. And I think he sort of seemed to already sort of like accept it to some degree, but he still was sort of, hesitant and really sort of, breaking himself off from sort of the Fire Nation as a national, and sort of, that sort of aspect of his life and his culture. Now he seems to be really willing to sort of embrace, other cultures, other places, other ways of thoughts and thinking. This is him sort of, using that to what he sees at least as sort of a benefit here, having, a more sort of, I guess, possible sort of integration of other nations on sort of a smaller scale. Like, it's not a huge thing or anything like that. It's just a small sort of thing here. And even just keeping the island its own sort of like independence, considering, sort of what, the current Fire Lord is doing, and when that started back a couple generations ago and stuff like that, like, that's a huge thing to sort of ask for, considering the consolidation of things that's going through the Fire Nation right now. So I think it's, it's good to see him sort of embracing this role and sort of, finally sort of like, in a way, sort of like standing up for himself. Like, he's able to sort of stand on his own 2 feet after everything that he's gone through, sort of his brother and just sort of his life up to this point. This is really him sort of coming to his own at this point in time.
Yeah, like I think the big thing, like, from this book is like, yeah, probably like from Gyatso as well. He's kind of also learned to just be like, yeah, Sozin's just like a person. He's flawed just like anyone else. He's not, because he was really important to me earlier on, I don't have to defend him in all things. But they're still friends. It's interesting. He's very reasonable about it. The next chapter is chapter 53, which is called Something Meaningful. So the first thing we get in this chapter is that Roku has made a glider staff for himself, but he's made it out of the special red bamboo from Lombok Island. So that's interesting. We didn't know about that before. He has a uniquely colored staff. He then gives a speech at the funeral for everyone who died. And it's really kind of important and kind of symbolic here. He nails the speech, so he gets over the bad speech from earlier on in the book. But then also, he says the right thing for people grieving at a funeral. He says basically the things that no one said to him at Yasuo's funeral, and none of the air nomads, including the elders, none of them said to Gyatso after Yama's loss. And so he really gets everything kind of correct here about, effectively, it's all based around the same thing he sort of said to Gyatso, of kind of like learning how to kind of love people even though they're gone, and that, you know, grief is something you have to spend time to go through with, and like have tea with it and then let it walk out the door type thing. And so Gyatso praises Roku for the right speech here, and it's meant to be this real signifier that, oh, Roku's really on the right path now. Everything seems to be beginning to come together for him as the Avatar. Given where he started out at, it's pretty good. So what are your thoughts on this? A good speech at last for Roku?
Yeah, no, it's a really good sort of way of bringing things full circle, because that was, such a struggle for him in the beginning. And even though he seemed to have been able to sort of deal with his own sort of grief, with his twin brother and everything, he still, it still seems like there's some lingering, you could say even like some tension there in terms of him sort of dealing with the situation. And he's able to give Gyatso earlier advice, but he doesn't know how to sort of like project that in another sort of way. So this is him really sort of understanding that, saying it to the people here, really sort of coming across with how, this is really going to affect them going forward and everything like that. So no, I thought this was a really good way, to sort of show, Roku's progress.
Mm-hmm. Next chapter is chapter 54, which is called Ever Shifting Currents. So it's a shortish one here, but it's pretty nice. So we're weeks later now. Roku actually has his head shaved now, when he didn't want to do this earlier. So he's fully embraced his airbending training. And now he's been given this scenario where he has to put out a fire with airbending, and use a method that really demonstrates the philosophy of airbending rather than the rather direct philosophy of firebending. And so this is specifically meant to challenge fire avatars with airbending, to kind of corral a fire and eventually like put it out with airbending. And he begins to start the kind of lesson here. And after all of the doubts about himself, he's finally ready, and he begins to airbend here. And it's just meant to be this highlight that he's really grown over the course of this journey, from not wanting to shave his head to now he has. And we also just address that a lot of his sudden advancement at bending was because of the cave, and he's not actually as good as he thought he was initially with airbending. He has had to kind of go back, relearn some of the basics, but he's making good progress, is the point that they kind of make here. But what are your thoughts on this chapter?
Yeah, no, his progress is here. He's definitely sort of, really sort of, I guess, begun to really sort of earn sort of his actual airbending sort of techniques here, because they make note that the way that he was using it before was sort of like how he was using sort of like his firebending, which kind of makes sense. Like, you would fall back on sort of the only bending that you sort of know, or that you're most comfortable with, in order to use the next one as a as an avatar. Because what else, what other sort of bending sort of experience do you have but your sort of natural sort of element? I think we've sort of seen that with Korra as well. So I like that sort of idea here, but I like that he's learning to control it. He's learning the specific sort of training exercise for the fire avatars, which is interesting that they have that sort of on cue and in their sort of history as an air nation there, because essentially they haven't had to use that sort of technique since the last one. So I wonder how Zito did with this sort of technique as well. But I think it's a cool sort of moment there.
Mm-hmm. And then the last chapter, chapter 55, Epilogue. So we cut to a year later, and Sozin is back on Lombok Island. And we get some kind of details here that, yes, it is now still allowed to govern itself. It is considered a special region of the Fire Nation. And the deal that they have here is that, yes, it governs itself, but the Fire Nation is allowed access to resources from the island. They don't go super into specifics here, but hopefully this doesn't get exploited, obviously, but it seems to be the spirit of the deal that Roku and Sozin made. And he's here with Dalasai, because Dalasai is kind of leading this kind of focus on, now, the Fire Nation focus on the special ore on the island. She, of course, got some of this for the first time from the dagger from Malaya, and she's super into metallurgy, so of course she's figured this out, has done tests on it, and they're back here to start properly getting this and mining it to help increase steel production, because they note that this is a perfect flux to increase steel production, make it quicker, more efficient. It'll also make higher quality steel as well, and will basically give a huge edge to the Fire Nation from a technological point of view, where they'll be able to make new things quicker, better, faster. And the other point they make here as well is that Taiso doesn't know about the ore on the island, and Sozin is purposefully keeping this from his father because he feels his father would basically squander away the ore in some sort of a trade deal or something like that, rather than properly taking advantage for the Fire Nation. And now Sozin is fully convinced that when his time comes, he will be, for sure, a better Fire Lord than his father, which we basically know turns out to kind of be the case. But from there, Dalaside then reveals that the Earth Kingdom also knows about and has at least some access to the ore, because the Earthbenders were allowed to go. They were allowed to be set free because of Roku from the island, and they went and told Earth Queen Gozun about it, the Queen of Omashu, and they avoided going to prison because of this information about this special ore. So the Earth Kingdom are now involved and interested in this. They don't say it by name, but the implication is that this is specifically Qixia and Yu Ming that they're talking about here, dealing with the Earth Queen, I believe. And so that's the kind of idea there. Fire Nation involvement with the ore. And then we have Sozin's reflection on Roku, so the reverse of what we got previously. Sozin feels Roku has changed for the worse, that he's been influenced by the people training him, especially the air nomads, and he doesn't like this. He feels the newly opened Fire and Air Center of Learning will fail and be gone within the year. It hasn't been super popular since it's been open. He wonders if potentially his friendship with Roku has run its course. He will, of course, use it to his advantage because Roku is the Avatar, but he now knows that Roku is not basically all about the Fire Nation's interests. His friend has kind of truly changed, truly adapted to being the Avatar, and doesn't just care about the Fire Nation like he and I guess his father wanted him to. And then when it comes to protecting the ore and dealing with the fact that the Earth Kingdom know about it, they do a kind of symbolic thing at the end here where basically food for Sozin and co is like shot down. Like these, I think birds get shot down, and it's meant to be the idea of like Sozin's gonna have the Earthbenders sort of shot down to keep this in the Fire Nation hands, basically, as he wants to find out everything about what the Earth Kingdom knows. And this seems to be a somewhat direct setup for, I'm guessing the next book will be more political Fire Nation, Earth Kingdom about this, but we don't know for sure because we don't actually have a description for book 2. So what are your thoughts on the epilogue chapter here? Sozin and his plans and thoughts on Roku.
Yeah, no, it definitely seems like this is the beginning of Sozin's sort of, plan for the future of the Fire Nation and how, they're going to interact, we'll say, with the rest of the world here, because he's, he sees the advantages that he has, and he wants to sort of, like we've seen from before, he wants to keep it all to himself, or at least all to his nation and what they can sort of do for the future. I don't know. It's interesting that they say that, the current Fire Lord Taiso is sort of, he would sort of, squander this in sort of like some sort of diplomatic way or anything like that. I guess he's, I don't know. He definitely feels like at some points they sort of indicate him to be sort of like somewhat ruthless, but I guess he's more sort of like a political Fire Nation leader rather than sort of, the warring one, which is what we know Sozin eventually sort of becomes. So yeah, that is something to note that he, they might actually have shared it if, the actual current Fire Lord actually had access to this or knew what was really going on. But again, Sozin's sort of keeping it all to himself, or at least to the people in his immediate vicinity that he can sort of control. It's, the Earth Queen, like she seems to know about it. I wonder, like you're saying, like how that'll come into play. They did make mention that Taimin is sort of in the Earth Queen's sort of court there, so there's that sort of angle, but she doesn't know, or she hasn't heard about anything about this sort of metal or anything like that. So I don't know. It's curious if this will really be sort of what the next sort of book is about, because I mean, it would be cool to see sort of like immediate follow-up to things, but you could also go further into the future as well, or to see how this really sort of affects things. But we know it's not going to go. No, we know it can only go sort of so far before it starts interacting with us. But no, I think it's a good way to sort of end things. Him sort of reflecting on sort of his friendship with Roku and sort of how the Avatar truly is one of sort of all nations now, and not just about the Fire Nation, which, like you're saying, was their sort of goal and hope for Roku, but he seemed to have broken apart from that.
Hmm. Yeah, a pretty interesting ending to the book where, like, the Tommen thing is also seems to be a little bit of a plot setup of, like, she's quote unquote his spy in the Earth Kingdom, but maybe didn't do that, or maybe he's been captured. And how direct of a sequel is it going to be? Because, yeah, we don't expect to jump ahead like many years, and now it's adult Roku. These books have always been focused on teenage avatars, and to properly switch things up, we'd expect maybe Roku to jump onto his next element, but we know that that doesn't happen for another couple of years. If we have a year time skip at the end here, he spends at least 3 more years training airbending before he moves on to water. So I think it probably is more of a direct sequel where we're talking about immediately after this time skip or a couple of months afterwards. And yeah, we're going to deal with this stuff where it was almost a teaser for this book that it would be quite focused on the politics with the Fire Nation versus the Earth Kingdom, but it kind of wasn't. We got the reveal that it's actually just a company where they weren't even given permission to come here. But now it seems like the Omashu Queen, not Earth King, of this era, Jailun, he doesn't seem to be involved just yet. So what exactly is happening here? And then also for book 2, we would assume that at this point, Roku and Sozin can't see each other for the next 11 years. So I'm guessing Sozin maybe won't be as in focus, or he will be more separate from things, which could be interesting to see for sure. There's a lot of potentially interesting dynamics to kind of do as we go forward. It does sort of feel like maybe Tommen comes into play as our third member of Team Avatar, probably for the next book, if we assume Roku goes to rescue her, because you need to develop that relationship ahead of their marriage at some point in the future and all this sort of stuff. It's just about, I suppose, making the plot interesting enough in the sense that, by the end of the book, we get the idea that with the cave destroyed, it seems like the power doesn't get contained on the island anymore. Theoretically, I suppose during the equinox, you should be able to still get a power boost, but it would just fade away immediately after the couple of minutes that it lasts. So that aspect of it is gone, and we've really switched to the ore being the focus, but that the ore is also because of the power source on the island is what they kind of get across as well, which kind of interesting. But yeah, the heavy assumption here is that this is going to be the sort of the birth of the Fire Nation, Navy Armada, basically, and that this is what ultimately gives them the military power to, after the Sozin's Comet attack starts the war, maintain a war against technically, 2 other whole nations. But is that your assumption about what the significance of the special ore is to create that giant armada?
That's what it feels like, right? Because they made note of sort of the mass production sort of aspects of the ore. So I mean that makes me think that they're able to sort of easily sort of fund their sort of war ideas and their war goals. Because it feels like they have it now. It's not like they don't have ships and stuff currently. But to make something on such a scale, especially if we're considering that the Fire Islands of the Fire Nation are, relatively small compared to the other ones, there would need to be some sort of advantage, we'll say, that they have that the other ones don't have in order to create their sort of armada. That's what I'm thinking, because it doesn't seem like there's, at least that I can think of, that there's any other sort of indication that the metal itself is extra strong or extra useful in order to sort of do things or anything like that. It's not like it's automatically refined to like platinum or something like that. That's gonna sort of like restrict other people or something like that. So I would think it would be more in terms of their production sort of aspects. But I do wonder if the sort of special properties of their sort of ore gets like dispersed into the world now that it doesn't sort of like restrained by the cave's sort of canopy or anything like that. Like, is this spreading other places and they're also able to use it or something like that, at least over years or something like that.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one because the implication from the kind of last paragraph of the last chapter is that Sozin's gonna, I guess, try to have everyone involved with the ore on the Earth Kingdom side of things like assassinated or something like that. So it seems like maybe Yu Ming and Qi are going to be involved in the book because you effectively have sort of the battle of the scientists of like on one side it's those two on the Earth Kingdom side, and then Dalasai is the scientist on the Fire Nation side of things when it comes to investigating the ore. You sort of wonder like, does the Earth Kingdom get some of this? And this might explain where their like those fancy caterpillar tank things come from, or not. And then it also is interesting that the connection here is to the Omashu Queen and not the Earth King, which is interesting by itself. So I don't know, what are you sort of expecting for like the core plot for book 2, Awakening?
Yeah, no, that is a good point. I mean, if it is dealing not with the major place in the Earth Kingdom, but another place, does that mean that it's like more of a contained thing, and that what Sozin wants to go through, or what we're assuming he wants to go through with, um, is easily done, compared to if it was like a whole kingdom or something like that, or a whole nation. I don't know, but in terms of the plot, I mean that seems like that would be, sort of an interesting way of going about things. Of like, how do you sort of infiltrate this sort of court and sort of the more political aspects of things. And no, I don't know. It's interesting that if Roku's involved with this, then that means that he's like given sort of a larger free range to sort of do things as sort of like the avatar in training, even though he's still not a fully realized avatar, at least as far as we know, or something like that. So I don't know. It makes me wonder what's going to be sort of the driving force that drags the avatar out from his sort of training. Like here, we had something that was a personal request from a friend, but that doesn't seem like that's going to matter as much in the future. So maybe, like you're saying, it is a Tom Min thing where that's sort of the aspect of the sort of direness of the situation, or maybe someone new or something new.
Yeah, because it immediately brings up like, okay, we have a more confident Roku now, but it's still early on. The side of the Avatar we don't really have, I guess, is he hasn't really done any like properly like political stuff yet. When it comes to like negotiation, he hasn't really met the other world leaders yet. That would feel like maybe the next kind of thing to go into, because like we know he goes on to become like he's basically a negotiator Avatar, and it seems like him and Tom In are like the negotiator diplomat power couple effectively, given that that's what the entire Roku era is about. It's like a cold war that's constantly kept from breaking out. So that makes sense. Gyatso's still going to be here because he's still in his airbending training, but then like what's Gyatso's arc going to be? Is he still going to be reflecting on the loss of Malaya, or is there more to that? And then like other things that people are bringing up, like they always teased it a few times in this book of like, what's the situation with dragons? Like when does Fang come into play? Sozin also has to get a dragon as well, and then Sozin of course has to implement the hunting of dragons afterwards. Are we going to see that? Does that happen later? We don't really know the full scope on a lot of that stuff. And then yeah, unless you introduce another new character to be part of the team, it does sort of feel like Tom In, yeah, probably comes into play again, because she was only in a very small section of this book, and I think broadly speaking, from what I've seen, the reception to her has been pretty good. So her being properly involved on the mission would be pretty nice to get, and it would allow her to sort of present information that kind of relates to Sozin without having Roku actually interact with Sozin because she's working for him. So that feels sort of ideal. It's just about like, yeah, what is the main plot? Like who's the villain of the book? I guess technically has to be Sozin, but kept a secret. And then I suppose the other thing we didn't discuss from just right towards the end of the book was the RPG reference of the Fire and Air Center of Learning, where Sozin is like convinced it will fail within a year, but actually by like 11 years later, it will be like the bane of his existence, and he is desperate to get rid of it then because it's too popular. And like Zaison will come into play. So maybe Zaison might get some focus in the next book because she was barely in this one. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that side of things? Do you think that they'll maybe lean into the Fire and Air Center of Learning, start the Zaison plot here, maybe have Zaison meet Monk Kandro at some point in the next book?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's cool. I definitely, would like to know more about Zaison. I think that would be, that would be a good, interesting way to sort of have like a B plot that sort of deals with the Fire Nation without us sort of actually really sort of being there with Roku, since Roku can't technically sort of like interact with Sozin in any way like that. So that could be a good way to go about it. I don't know. That's gives you a lot of different options there, especially considering how we know it does become involved later on. I wonder how much they're going to sort of lean into that, or if they're going to sort of stay away from that and just sort of focus on sort of Roku's side of the story and sort of what he's doing. But it does feel like there needs to be some way to keep Sozin in play without him, directly being involved with things, which kind of makes sense because, like, as the prince, like, normally you're not really doing like your dirty work yourself directly. Now we've seen, a couple princes that have been, heavily involved with things, but that's, at least in my mind, that doesn't typically seem to be sort of the norm of things. Normally you go through, other people, middlemen, stuff like that. So if it's going through Tom Min or, even Zaystan, if she's like, what if she leaves the capital and she's the one that's, sort of interacting with Roku wherever Roku is at? Like, that might be an interesting way, considering, how much we know of her becoming sort of influenced by airbending sort of, ideals later on. That might be a cool angle that they could play with. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We will need the description to, I think, properly speculate on it. Who knows? Maybe that might be the Roku information we get from Comic-Con, if there is any. Because the weird situation with that, I don't think we covered it in the news, but the book has been delayed, at least in terms of the date listed on the website. It's now listed for October 14th instead of whatever it was, like July 17th. So pretty heavy delay, but this book, Reckoning of Roku, also was delayed, but then it got like reverted, which usually doesn't happen. So I don't know what the full situation is here in terms of how locked in this change is. Either way, it's still scheduled for at some point next year. Maybe it'll be later in the year. Maybe we'll see it switch back to July. But we don't know when exactly the info is going to come. But Randy Rabai is on the panel at New York Comic Con, so there's a chance. Do Abrams have any news whatsoever to talk about? We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, that has been the discussion on Reckoning of Roku. Another good Avatar novel, in my opinion. I think we're 5 for 5 in terms of all of them being of good quality. Of course, I think there's always going to be preference between different fans about which of the Avatars they prefer, especially when we're only halfway through Roku's 2 books. But at least in my mind, I don't think there's a giant jump in quality between almost like any of the books. They're all of a roughly similar level, even though I have my favorites. And I think it was the switch from writer to writer, I think, went very smoothly in my mind, and they definitely added a lot of needed depth to Roku as a character, and Sozin as a character, and Malaya, I think, comes out of this as being a fan favorite. People definitely want some sort of a visual design for. But what are your final thoughts on Reckoning of Roku now that we've been through the full discussion? How does this stand up against the other Avatar novels for you?
Yeah, no, I think for me, it definitely falls in line with all of them in terms of general quality and getting the story out there, feeling like it's part of the Avatar world, getting the bending right, adding some extra depth and lore to the characters or to the world that we didn't sort of know about before. I think it it hits most of the beats in terms of, getting the story of an Avatar that we didn't know, as much as we really thought we did. I think that was sort of the thing with this book is like, oh, we know a good bit about Roku and sort of what he did, but I think this definitely sort of explains that there's a lot more to his individual story, just as what we saw with Aang when we actually got to see the episodes and everything like that. So it definitely fills in a lot of gaps. It gives us a clearer picture of his sort of character and Sozin, like you were saying, as well as just gives us another sort of new thing in the Avatar world that we didn't know about, but fits into what we've seen so far. So I'm definitely curious to see where they go from here and how this plays in sort of the bigger picture of Roku's sort of time as an Avatar.
Yeah, so hopefully book 6 also delivers, and then we would heavily expect book 7 and 8 to be Karuk books. Feels like at this point that's all but confirmed, that like it would be weird if they did something different, because we've done Earth for Kyoshi, we've done Air for Yang Chen, Fire for Roku, and those are all kind of like 3 avatars, quote unquote, from the same cycle. So Karuk would be the last one to fit that group of 4, that is 4 avatars in a row and covering one of each of the 4 elements. It'd be weird to break that sequence in my mind, and especially if it's fully focused on teenage stuff. Well, there's definitely room for Karuk and his team Avatar, full stories about them working together, where we have like teenage Jeonju, teenage Kelsang, teenage Heiran, and so on. I think everyone would be completely up for some stories of that team in action. So I think they're set. Like they just have Chronicles of the Avatar as a way to just deliver high quality books for as long as they want to do them. We'll see how long they go and if they plan to expand the novels, but so far so good on this front. This means that next podcast we'll finally be able to return to our rewatch for Avatar and Korra. I had to look this up, but the episodes that we'll be doing next is on the Korra side of things, 212, which I think is a harmonic convergence right towards the end of book 2. And then on the Avatar side of things, it'd be 2 episodes from book 2 as well. The Chase and also Bitter Work from getting right towards the middle of book 2. So it'll be exciting to get back to that for the first time in a while. And also on the next podcast, we can discuss any news that came out of New York Comic Con as well. But otherwise, that's been episode 280 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.